I'm Nick Von Walkerbarth, and you're listening to the VonDubCast. If you don't want to listen to me gap in the intro and you want to skip right to the interview, skip about 16 minutes. If you do, please consider doing one of these couple things that really helps out the show. Following the social medias for the VonDubCast, subscribing, and leaving a review. If you could do those things, that'd be awesome. Also, give me a subscription on the YouTube channel. That'd be great too. All right, welcome everybody to episode 65 of the VonDubCast, and got a really huge episode for you guys today, huge in so many different ways. In the first way, in which somebody from the title can already probably guess if they've already listened to maybe one or two episodes of the podcast, is that it's a big episode because it's my first professional MMA fighter. Andrew Mavridis, he's 8-0, 7-0 amateur, and then has his one professional fight. If you listen to him talk, you can tell he is itching to get more than just that first fight, but COVID's really made it difficult for fighters in Canada to pursue their dream, which is very unfortunate and something we talked about a lot in this podcast. But just to be able to talk MMA on that level with somebody like Andrew, it was such a fun conversation. I had so much enjoyment out of it. And then, and to be able to have, I feel like I fantasize about some of these questions that I'll be able to ask guys like Andrew and thousands of others in the MMA community, these types of questions, and just for it to, always go in my head one way, and then to be able to actually hear somebody with real knowledge kind of say like, oh, this is why that idea won't work. And just to be able to really change my mindset and change my ideas in the moment like that is just so, that's what I'm looking for with this podcast, is to get people on that have the expertise to be able to change someone as stubborn as me in the moment, to really see in a flash from true conversation where the errors in my own thinking lie, and not to be so attached to them. And I really enjoyed that. So that's a huge feather in my cap to have a guy like Andrew on the podcast, hopefully the first of many, and also another big episode because it's the first episode of Lloydminster May. I did a trip back there a couple weeks ago. If you guys followed the podcast or followed the social medias, you see it was just an amazing weekend. Andrew was the first recording we did. Then I did another one with Tanner Applegate and Ken Rutherford from the War on Weakness podcast. Then I did one with Sean Newman, who's one of the biggest podcasters out of Alberta here, kind of another local guy, really someone to kind of see how he's doing things, what I like, what I don't like, kind of what I want to take for myself, what I want to steal. And I had another really good conversation with him. He really forced me to think about what I was doing in a lot of ways, maybe put me into a bit of a spiral in some ways, asking really good questions and really making me think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and what bullshit excuses I'm telling myself. So that was amazing. And something about that weekend and this Lloydminster May that I didn't really have planned going into it. I kind of had the idea, if I got 3 episodes with Lloyd guys, I could try and get another one and I'll have a whole month's worth. What I didn't realize is that May has fucking 5 Mondays in it. So if I want to do every Monday in May for Lloydminster May, I need to find 2 more after this weekend. And luckily enough, I was able to just have a family connection to an ex-NHL player from the Lloydminster area. I was doing a little bit of a guesswork on the Instagram stories. They're trying to get people to guess who the ex-Oiler was, and maybe that's the biggest hint that of them all. And I'm sure I'll do another guess maybe with this hint and maybe a few others, see how close we can get you guys to when I'm getting close to releasing that episode. Some of you, I'm sure, can put it together just from that. Ex-Oiler from Lloyd, not too tough to tell, but we'll keep that between us. And then those people that don't listen to these intros or skip right to the conversations will be left out, and it's just our little secret. And then, but even still, now I need another one because that's 4 episodes from Lloyd, and I need a 5th. But sort of where I was going with this is that it's another big episode as well, because it's going to be the first episode here where I'm able to do, this isn't really a advertisement per se, but I have a couple things to kind of bring to you guys, and it's the first steps of what is going to be in the future advertising. And this is my way of getting familiar with how to talk about certain companies and certain ideas to try and bring awareness and to try and promote, because eventually with this podcast, I'm going to want to make money off it. And I'm going to want to bring on sponsors that believe in what I'm doing here, aren't going to, try and have any input on what I'm trying to say or what I'm trying to do or who I'm trying to have on, but just believe in it. And I think I can do a really good job of bringing effective marketing to people. I feel like I've listened to so many podcasts over these years that I really know how to do it well. And that's something I'm excited for, something I was very hesitant to do for so many different reasons. But I have some cool things to get it started this month with Lloydminster May. And then that's just the first stepping off point. And there's so many other things that kind of come with that point where I was wanting to start moving towards advertising on the podcast is kind of also going to bring in another couple other big ideas that were in a similar vein, but a little bit different. And I always am trying to think of ways to monetize a podcast other than the traditional sense. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. And the first one is Bike for Breakfast. It's an idea that I think Sean Newman, who I just talked about, one of the guys that I had that amazing conversation with in Lloyd, and Ken Rutherford, another one of those guys that I talked to in Lloyd, them and a couple other guys are going to bike on pedal bikes all the way to Tufnell, Saskatchewan from Lloydminster. It's about 500 and some kilometers. They're going to do a couple things, take a few pictures, I think maybe do a podcast with this internet sensation, Quick Dick McDick. I don't know if anybody has heard of him. Give him a Google. Quite the guy. And then they're going to bike all the way back. And they're raising money. This is going to be at the start of June, I believe. And they're going to be raising money for children, schools around the Lloydminster area. It might be around the Tufnell area as well. Just kind of they were looking at what is the biggest impact that they can make. And the idea came from such a beautiful place. I think Ken and Sean talk a lot, and they've been very frustrated throughout this pandemic. The lack of attention paid to our kids, the lack of attention paid to a lot of things other than the virus itself, right? It just has blinded us so much to so many other ill effects and so much suffering that is being brought on, and not mitigated in ways that are easy to mitigate. So but they were also very frustrated with themselves of talking about it all the time and not making a big difference, even though knowing that they're both very capable people and they had it within themselves to make that difference. So this is what they're doing. I can't think of a greater idea, or just it's so important what they're doing it for. The why behind it is so important that I really think that makes a big difference. And then just the I don't know, the motivational fuel, I guess, for like myself, and just I hope you guys see that as well, to see that if you're frustrated with something, you can take action. Even something like that, they're planning to raise some real money, and even if they don't, right, there's no failure. Just like I always talk about with this podcast, is the only way to fail this now is to give up and stop doing it. If I keep going, I'm going to keep growing, and it's going to keep getting better. Same thing with that, right? As long as they commit to that bike and they make it happen and they raise some money, it's a success either way. And I just love that. So that's something I'm probably going to be promoting I haven't even talked to them about promoting on the podcast, and they might not even be aware. I don't know if they listen to this or what, but I think that's just something that I can do to help them. I had such amazing conversations with them, and I'm really proud of what they're doing. I'm really proud of what they stand for and the ideals there. So yeah, and then also I have another exciting announcement. My girlfriend Alyssa has launched her landscape design company. This is something that she's had a big dream for a long time. She did a lot of schoolwork, did a undergrad degree in landscape design, and then went back for a master's degree. We lived long distance because she was doing that master's degree for the first 2.5, 3 years of our relationship. It was her back and forth between Winnipeg and here to do that. And then she finally, graduated, did all that stuff, got her website built, got the name. I know the name was tough to come up with, Open Air Collective. That's what she landed on, Open Air Collective Landscape Design. Some might have more to the name. I'll link it in the description and all that stuff. But what she's doing is any kind of outdoor spaces, parks, plazas, residential, commercial, just landscaping, anything outdoors, anything open under the open air. That's her dream, right? Like, I know every time that somebody asks me what she can do with that degree, I always point to golf courses, because that was one thing she told me a couple days into our relationship when I asked what landscape architecture was. She told me, that was the one thing that stuck in my head. But it's pretty much anything outdoors, right? Like if you're looking to redo the landscaping on your house, on your cabin, on your cottage, reach out. If you mention that you heard about her new company on the VonDubCast, you'll get a little bit of a discount. We just kind of talked about this before I sat down to record, so I don't have anything laid out in stone. There might be a discount code that comes in later, but for now, most of it's probably just going to be reaching out to her and seeing what you can do. She's in Grand Prairie with me right now, but all over Alberta she could go to if also as well, kind of the main areas I would think would be Grand Prairie, Slave Lake, Edmonton, or Calgary, or Lloyd, and Lloydminster May in Lloyd as well. If you have something you'd want to do, you can probably send her pictures, but it'd probably be better for her to come out and take a look at it and go through with you. And then she designs it all up, puts it on a computer so you can see the layout of exactly what you would be getting from it. And it's a really cool idea. It's her dream. It's something that I'm happy to promote, and I'm so proud of her and all the work that she put in to chasing that dream. And I know it's a scary process, and it's something that I know well of not following a traditional path and getting a job with somebody and trying to chase something that you believe in. It's very scary, and I couldn't be more proud of her. So please give her all the social medias for Open Air Collective a follow. I will attach it to this in the description as well, I'm sure. And that'll probably be, it's not a sponsorship. I don't think Alyssa's going to pay me anything. Maybe she'll make me a nice supper or something one of these nights for it, but it'll probably be a recurring one every once in a while on the podcast. We'll talk about it and kind of maybe keep you guys up to date on her journey with chasing that goal. And hopefully at some point I'll get her on the podcast here to come talk to you guys about it, maybe explain a little bit better than I did, just on, well, you can design golf courses. Like, what the hell does that mean, Nick? Anyways, it's a cool idea. I'm really excited. It's cool to just be able to try and promote some things on this podcast and use this medium that I've built up for 64 episodes of trying to gain some trust with you guys and trying to introduce you guys to who I am, so that when I talk about something like this, it might hold a little bit of weight and it might mean something to you. So that's part of it. If you missed all this and just skipped to the interview to hear Andrew, that's all good too. This is probably something that you're going to get used to. I'm going to try and do ads in this sense where I want to talk about it and tell you why and how it came into be and why I believe in this product. I don't really want to just bring things on like, oh yeah, buy this product, unless it's a product that I use and I could speak to my own personal usage of that product. I'm probably not going to have it on. And it's always going to be in an intro like this. I say this now, maybe this will come back to haunt me, but I always hate mid-roll podcast advertisements, even though that's where the big money is. If you want to get paid a lot for your sponsorship, it's got to be right in the middle of the episode. I don't really like that. And all the podcasts that I really listen, all the podcasters that I really look up to, all do their ads before the podcast like this. So I think that's probably what I'll try and continue doing for you guys. And then I give you the time at the start. So if you want to skip it, you have all the rights in the world too. So yeah, that's really exciting. That's what's going on for me. Been quite the ride since that trip to Lloydminster to record these amazing episodes. A lot of ups and downs, lots of personal stuff with the family, lots of tough things at work, some injuries. I'm probably going to record a solo podcast right after this. I'll get into all the nitty gritty of it, but had a great little weekend here. Watched some amazing UFC last night. Very apropos for this episode. We probably talked about some of the guys that were fighting on that card on this episode. I don't remember. It was a couple weeks ago now, but that was such an amazing card last night. That Yuri Prochazka guy, like, he is something else. When you really look into his mindset and where he comes from and just the true martial artist that he is going to be a dangerous guy for a long time. I still think I got my money on Jan Blachowicz when they inevitably go toe to toe, but just to have a guy that is that skilled at that, he's 28 and his mindset is just so strong and he's so on the right path and he just is going to get better and better. I'm very excited to see where he goes. Marav Davashvili, I always tell my best friend Chase, this is going to be your future favorite fighter. So I'm glad he got to watch it. It was a little tough because his fight was at the same time as the Oilers game. So I had to double balance. And then there's also a heavyweight boxing fight. Andy Ruiz won a wild back and forth slobber knocker of a fight against something nipply, areola or something. I don't know. It had some sort of nipple terminology. I think it was areola or something like that. And it was just a wild fight. So I had 19 screens going. I had the hockey game, the UFC, the boxing. I had everything going last night. So that's one of my favorite things that really refreshed me and has me ready to attack the week. Really enjoyed that. Again, I'll probably do a solo episode to maybe break down some of that. This episode, you'll really like it. If you like MMA in any sense, if you like somebody chasing greatness, there's so many ways. We talked about fighter pay, weight cutting, the amazingness of, how the female domination has come over the sport. Just seeing that what happened the other weekend. I mean, talking about the Valentina and Rose fights that were upcoming when we were sitting down for this interview, and just to see exactly what we talked about, how the women are almost passing the men right now in terms of talent and skill and what they're bringing to the octagon. It's absolutely amazing to see. We talked about rule changes that need to happen, the dynamics of the UFC and the fighters and the business side of it versus the fighter side of it, and how it all goes together and how it's so interesting, and the media side of fighting that really helps somebody like me get into the sport to this level that I have, and to tell the story of these amazing fighters, because every fighter to reach the point of what the pinnacle of what the UFC is, with the evolution of what MMA's become, to reach that level, your story has to be amazing, right? There's nobody that gets to the UFC that doesn't have an amazing story. And it's so cool to be able to hear all of them. And hopefully more episodes like this will be able to train or teach me the skills I would need to be able to tell those stories as well. And I am really excited for that into the future, and can't say thank you again to Andrew enough for this conversation that we had. This is the conversation I've been dying to have on this podcast since I started it in MMA. I mean, I'm still dying to have this conversation when it comes to so many other things, right? Like YouTubers and I've had authors on, but other authors, you know, there's certain actors, there's certain professional gamers. There's so many areas that I want to dive into, that it's fun just to get the first steps out of the way and to have a conversation like this with someone so open and inviting as Andrew. Just a really top-notch guy, salt of the earth, really good conversation. I think you guys are going to like it. Well, that's been about almost a 16-minute intro, so I should probably just shut my big mouth and let you get to it. But yeah, hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, all these social media things, follow Bike for Breakfast, follow Open Air Collective, follow the VonDubCast. Do what I say. I'm yelling at you now. I said I would stop. I haven't. Enjoy. Bye. All right. Well, I just got to start off by saying a huge thank you for coming here. Anybody that's listened to my podcast before will know I'm pretty obsessed with MMA, and to be able to sit down with my first actual fighter and ask a couple questions, you know, learn a couple something here and there. I've been looking forward to this for weeks.
Well, it's a huge honor to be the first one on as a fighter, but yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So I listened to you on Sean Newman's podcast, and I was very taken with a bunch of things, kind of your mindset surrounding fighting. I was really interested in your coach and kind of his mindset and how he was going about it, making sure that the well-roundedness as a fighter is very paramount in how he's training you and how he wants you to proceed. And I'm curious, is that something that you were seeking out, or was that something that you just wanted to fight and that's kind of what he instilled, just like making sure you got your boxing and got your kickboxing and got like all the separate things and didn't wait for you just to pick them up here and there along the way, where you see some guys just specialize into one area and just pick up the rest along the way, where he really put an emphasis on making sure you were picking that all up from the start and training all that from the start?
I honestly have no idea why.
Yeah.
He started me like that. I don't, it's not a detriment or anything.
Yeah.
I thought it was the proper way.
For sure.
Even seeing young up and comers now come to the gym, and they kind of just start with kickboxing or you know, they don't really start
whatever's exciting
scratch,
to them.
right?
Yeah.
And there's lots of takeaways from just boxing, like certain movements, transferring the weight and stuff that you don't really fully understand jumping into kickboxing or anything like that.
Right.
So it really helped me out because I'm a big proponent of moving your body properly and stuff.
Right.
So yeah.
And that's where I say that I agree. I think that is the right way to do it. I mean, I know nothing about it, but just from being a fan of the sport and watching all these guys and seeing who's successful and who's not, and trying to parse that out myself of kind of what makes you more successful than others. And I think you can see it when one of the big examples of it too is looking at Claressa Shields, that world famous female boxer that's now getting into MMA. And she's talking about exactly what you're saying, the body movements. You can teach someone how to throw a punch, but until you get that natural muscle memory of how you do it, it's second nature to you. It's so different, right? They also talk about it with wrestling with Kevin Holland these last couple of weekends when he's gone out, and they talk about his wrestling, and he knows the certain steps, but it's just not natural enough to him that in those moments when it's not the first couple parts of the wrestling sequence and it gets into the other ones, he gets lost a little bit and then gets taken down. And it's so important to have that base and to build up that muscle memory as early as possible, and not just kind of leaving it to the side and concentrate on the one area you're really good at, which I think is a really easy trap to fall into if you really excel in jiu-jitsu or in the kickboxing, the stand-up, where it's a little less fun to train the things you're not as good at.
I agree with that too, but it's a lot less fun to train wrestling, man.
Wrestling
is so hard. A lot of people don't like it.
Yeah.
It's hard to get guys out to like just wrestle with and stuff
around
here,
right?
Because it's humbling.
It is.
It's a grind. It hurts.
Yeah,
you know, jiu-jitsu is the soft sport. Like you can make jiu-jitsu easy and nice, and everybody comes back. Right?
Yeah.
But wrestling is butting heads and
it's funny you say that. So I mentioned before we started, you asked if I'd done any training. I said I did a couple of jiu-jitsu classes right before the pandemic started, and I probably maybe had a little bit of a misnomer there. It wasn't right before the pandemic started. Like I did those 4 classes, took a break for probably a month, and then the pandemic hit. And that month break was because on the 4th jiu-jitsu class I went to, the wrestling instructor was teaching it. Oh, yeah. And we did a lot of wrestling, and I could barely walk the next day. I couldn't believe it. Now, I'm in half decent shape. I'm not an athlete by any means, but I run every day. I try and keep my cardio shape up. I thought I was in half decent shape. And then those first 3 jiu-jitsu classes was very much different, right? It's just different muscles. It's a whole different beast that I didn't realize. But then I thought I had that under a handle after a couple classes. And then I go in there and started doing some wrestling, and they were doing fireman toss and stuff. My legs did not work the next day. It's crazy. And it's not like we're even doing any leg movements, but just the amount of manipulating somebody's body, how hard a work that is, that gave me such a different respect for what wrestling is as a sport. And it's almost, I feel like the one thing that people know about wrestling is almost that it's really hard, and they don't know much else about the beautiness of the sport and kind of the intricacies of it. And you see that because it's so popular as a college sport down the States, but once you,
in certain states, I wouldn't say it's
right.
In all of the United States, it's popular, but in certain states, it's
huge.
It's a way of life there. You know, but I just don't think people quite understand what's going on. Like the point system isn't really explained. Right. There's no,
it's not very welcoming to the fans.
Yeah.
It's not as transparent. You need to really have some knowledge,
I guess, on TV. So it's really hard to sell wrestling, but as a base for martial arts,
there's nothing better, really.
Nothing better.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Joe Rogan always says, wrestling is the one thing that lets you dictate where that fight is going to take place, if you want it on the feet or if you want it on the ground, which is what is so fun for me as a fan of the sport, watching the evolution, where when I first fell in love with the sport, it was there wasn't very many well-rounded guys, right? And somebody that was well-rounded was, a great stand-up fighter that had a little bit of ground game, or a great guy on the ground that has a little bit of power in his hands. That's what you see. But now you see that people are coming in with amazing games all over. And that's where you see somebody that isn't worried about where the fight is going to take place. Now they can take that measure of that fight in their opponent, see how it's going. And if, they do 2 rounds of stand-up and it's going well for them, but then that 3rd round in a championship fight, the stand-up starts to swing. Now they can take that guy down and try their hand on the ground and experiment, see, the fight might be going great on the feet and you might be winning, but you might be absolutely dominant on the ground. So you have that all within your tool belt, where there's some guys where even if that was their game, even you see these jiu-jitsu guys come in, sometimes they just don't have the wrestling to pull their game into that, right? That you can
keep them down, or to
get that takedown and start to institute where their expertise is. You can't see it, right? And it's so interesting to me now, the more and more I get into the sport, is to realize how much that wrestling goes into it. So is that something that, if you mentioned it's hard to get guys out to practice wrestling with around here, is that something that you have to travel for? Is there bigger wrestling?
I have before the pandemic, for a couple camps, I was going back and forth between Saskatoon and Edmonton. Yeah. Modern MMA in Saskatoon, Kurt Southern, and those guys are pretty great out there. Yeah. And then Little Sweatshop, my BJJ coach, Mitch Clark, trains out of there, and a couple of savages come out of that. Yeah. Tanner Bozer comes out of that.
Nice. I'm a big fan of his.
And then, a couple open mats I dropped in there, and this little dude, I'm not going to say he was little, but he was a little smaller than me guy, wrestler from the Golden Bears from the college. And we did some stand up, and I've never been thrown around like that.
It makes you feel like a little kid.
It was interesting. Yeah. It's a good feeling. And just getting thrown and kind of dominate like that, you can learn so much of what is possible. Yeah. So, it's pretty cool to learn.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you almost need to get thrown around like that to see what the levels to the game are, right? If you're always wrestling with guys that are close to your skill level, you kind of almost get the wrong sense of what that sport is in general, right? And I think you see that with jiu-jitsu too, and guys from small towns, I think what it is. And they always talk about, if you can say you've rolled with a black belt, but there's levels to black belt. You can roll with a certain guy where he can take 10 black belts in a row and tap them all out, no problem, right? There's levels to it. And I feel like that's where you see so much advancement for guys that go out of AKA down in Florida, right? Where you just have unbelievable wrestler, but which is funny that it's American Kickboxing Academy and they have the best wrestler. You know, like that just is such a funny thing to me. But like Daniel Cormier and all those guys out of Dagestan, all training out of there. You see anybody that goes into that camp, right? And you're going to come out of it with a real respect for wrestling and a real understanding. And you have those amazing minds that really know what goes into making yourself that person that can dominate anyone and just know how to manipulate a human body, right? And I feel like you even see it when those wrestlers that have that collegiate background come into striking, they just have such a sense of their body. There's such a balance, they're so grounded that they can create. You almost see half the power punches that came into the UFC. I think nowadays it's not becoming like this, but I think for a while, every big power puncher was always just these wrestlers that realized, you know, they just had all this strength, and when they could get taught the right technique, they could put
big
that
overhand right,
overhand right, exactly. Dan Henderson,
famous for that, yeah,
exactly. And and that's what it was. And I think what's so cool now is that was the evolution of the sport. And I feel like what is so fun for me of being a fan of the sport is just to see the evolutions almost yearly, right? The game changes every year, and in a big way, right? Like football, there might be some small tweaks to the game. Maybe a rule change will make it a little bit different, right? Yeah. That you can get it to the receivers a little more, right? Yeah, certain things like that. But it's not as game changing where if you took an MMA fighter that was on the top of the game, just cryogenically froze him so he couldn't train, but was peak elite, and you threw him in 2 years later against like the number 10 guy ranked or number 14 guy ranked, there's a good chance they're going to lose, because that's just how fast the sport moves. And I love guys like George St. Pierre that are coming out and saying this now and saying like, it's an insult to the sport not to say that these guys up and coming are better because of how the sport is natured.
It's
and how
always evolving.
It's always evolving.
I listen to Chael Sonnen quite a bit, and he talks about the only reason that Randy Couture was able to come back in his 40s and win the world heavyweight title was he would show up to the wrestling class, to the kids class, and train what they're doing.
Right.
And always seeing how the sport is growing, and it never passed him, right? So he was always up to date and current and stuff. So you just got to stay on top of the game.
Yeah,
and, you know, you can't just, this is working right now and this is all I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I.e. Kevin Holland. So yeah.
You have to be moving those games, and you want to talk about somebody that is trying to fix that gap of bringing wrestling to the masses. That's Chael Sonnen right now. And I was going to bring that up. I think there's some really cool things happening right now that are helping bridge that gap of people that, like myself, that don't know a lot of the intricacies of the wrestling, but I've seen so many people talk about it in a way that I know if I was to invest that time, I would fall in love with it. Like I've fallen in love with MMA.
Sure, yeah.
And he's trying to bridge it with Submission Underground and all of his kind of things, and just trying to always big up these up and coming collegiate wrestlers and stuff. That's amazing. But and another point to that is kind of, I think people might say, oh, well, look at GSP when he came back and fought for the 185 title there.
Sure.
You know, he was removed for a year or two at least at that point. But when you talk to people, he was in the gym every day of that break, right? And he still is. And they still say, if you go and train with Firas Zahabi out in Montreal, George St. Pierre is still the baddest guy in that gym.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah,
and he hasn't lost
practice,
that.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that is what you need for him to be that. It wasn't that he took that break off and came back with his skill set. You know, you take that GSP that fought Michael Bisping and you put him back there, he would absolutely annihilate the Michael Bisping or the George St. Pierre of a couple of years before, because he was keeping on evolving with the sport. So kind of where I'm going with all that is I'm curious to ask somebody like yourself that's up and coming in the sport, that is wanting to chase it and want it to make that dream realized. How intimidating is that to know, or is that exciting to you, that this sport is always evolving and what you're training right now? Because I feel like for myself, I would ask myself a lot of questions about, am I doing it right? And it almost seems like nobody, because of that speed of the evolution, nobody knows if they're doing it right. And you almost just kind of have to trust your coaches and trust the process that they're trying to get you in the best shape that they know how. And then how do you balance that out with staying in touch with all the newer things and making sure you're not falling behind in that way?
It all does come down to the coaching.
Yeah.
My coach has been in the game for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And some things I've heard like around the area, even on the West Coast, East Coast, some places are very cliquey. Some gyms are like, we know it all.
Yeah.
Right. My coach has a philosophy like, go learn.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't forget where you came from. Go learn.
Yeah.
Come back here, teach all this stuff. So that's why he's kind of was going to send me before the pandemic to a couple other places.
Right.
Just check it out. You got to find what works for you. Right. Not all coaches are like Trevor Whitman.
Yeah.
And just uber nerdy about it and just
and
Very analytical.
And want to dedicate themselves to that athlete and just maximize every little min-max they can with that specific athlete to make them what they are. And you see the results of when you have somebody like that and you can find something like that, what they can do with an athlete is absolutely amazing to me. One of my favorite parts of this pandemic, and it's hard to find a favorite part, is watching these fights with no crowds and getting to listen to the corner work. As a deep fan like myself, I have been in heaven. Like listening to, Trevor Whitman's one of them, but then there's another guy, I'm just blanking on his name, but every time he corners, it's absolutely amazing. And I just love listening to him. And it's not like some corners you hear where a guy kind of has his cornering style and that's what he does for every fighter.
Sure.
But this guy that, again, I'm sure it'll come to me at some point during the light bulb will go off and say, this is his name. And every time it's different. And between rounds it's different. What that fighter needs in that moment. Sometimes he's very calm and bringing them down. Sometimes he's bringing them up. He's always very honest about where he gave those rounds and letting them know what's going on in the fight.
The adjustments. And
the adjustments that they need to make. And hey, maybe you lost that round. You know what? Hey, I don't fucking know. That could have gone either way. You need this round, right? Like that kind of stuff. I feel like sometimes you see corners, like watching Mike Perry fight the other night, where the corner work is better than what we've seen in his last couple fights, but still it's like, oh man, I just feel like there's so much more information that he really could have taken. Like, and every guy's different, wants different information, is going to take it differently. But just little things, even if you know the guy doesn't want any tips or what to work on, he's like a Mike Perry that just wants to go out, you can still tell him like, hey, maybe you won that round, maybe you lost it. And there's still information you can arm them with.
Or that left hook is there whenever, or just one thing. Right?
Just little things just to get him in. And I feel like
that kick sets up a punch that if you land, it's whatever. You know,
there's so many little things, but I found just to watch the different corners is just giving me such a different respect for how important. We always knew that coaching was important in all sports, but I think MMA is paramount. It's one of those ones. And I think it's almost even hard to say that because I think each fighter's differently, and the amount that the coach matters is very much based on the fighter and how coachable they are too, right? Like I think there's, El Kukui isn't going to be out there listening to his coaches as much as some other guys because he knows and he's been around for so long and he talks that way of just, I know how to fight. If I'm missing something big, let me know. But there's other guys like when we saw Justin Gaethje get with Trevor Whitman there, and he listens to every single thing he says. He's almost
Tony and
he's on autopilot almost, and just I am your vessel. You fight this fight through me. I will do everything you say. You tell me to throw that kick, I'll throw that kick. You tell me to,
there was a point. I think it was after he won that interim belt, and then we went on Joe Rogan, and they talked about he had to accept or want to be like, I want to be a champion.
Yes.
I don't want to be the most exciting fighter anymore. So that was his mind switching to allow Trevor to fully coach him.
For sure.
That was the game changer. So as a fighter, you got to be open and ready.
Yeah.
Right. And it depends on your goal. Do you want the most bonuses? Do you want highlight reel knockouts? Cool.
For sure.
You won't be a champion like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting to me too, is to see now how impactful that why is for these fighters, right? What is your goal? Are you trying to be a champion or are you trying to win the most bonus? That is a very different idea, right? Like, and I feel like it's so cool to see the outcomes of those different whys, and you get to see all this wide range of fighters. If you're a fight fan these days with UFC, Bellator, PFL, ONE FC, you can see so much fighting, and you get such a broad range of seeing what works and what doesn't. You get to see, the respectful martial artists like Wonderboy Thompson. You get to see kind of the peak of what that can be, or what we think the peak is, because we have no idea. The sport's too young to say that that's the peak. But from what we can see right now, that him and a couple other guys is where you point to for that. But then you can see the absolute wild men that just are just born to fight and have no fear and just go out there and just want to destroy, and that's deep within them. And you get to see not only all these different kinds of fighters, but then within that, how they can be coached by different coaches and be molded in different ways. Like you can take that absolute savage destroyer and you can mold him, and you can take kind of like a Justin Gaethje, right? When he got with Trevor, you can see that can be almost I'm trying to find the right metaphor for it, but it almost seems like you're just like taking a magnifying glass, like they're just the sun's energy, right? And it's powerful, but it's not very localized, right? And you just put that magnifying glass in front of them, and it localizes it all in one point, and they're unstoppable almost, right?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how serious Kevin Holland was about
going to Dagestan.
Yeah, taking up DC on the wrestling and stuff. So we'll see that.
Yeah, and that was very interesting to me because after that first fight he lost to Derek Brunson there, where he kind of got wrestle fucked for 5 rounds, right? Like that was pretty much what happened. And,
For sure,
and he kind of knew it. And I think he took a lot out of it, of kind of his antics, which is always his thing. And I feel like it was interesting for me to hear him talk after that and talk about how he almost, that is who he is. And he's a big mouth and he likes to talk, but he talked about that big mouth moniker kind of being put onto him. And then he wanted to live up to it. So he kind of fell into that a little too much and fine. And he said, I'm always going to talk. But then you saw in his latest fight, kind of happened again where the wrestling was his undoing, right? But he looked a lot better and he talked a lot less, right?
He talked a lot less,
yeah, but he still had that little piece of him that's never going to go away because that's deep inside of him. But he recognized that he wasn't being true to himself that other way too, that being over the top, talking to DC over the cage mid round, like in between rounds and that, right? Like it was so cool to kind of see in real time these fighters that are finding these lessons about themselves. And my favorite part is listening to, and I guess maybe I can just expand on this to a bigger point. One of my favorite parts of being a fan of MMA is the system surrounding it. The Ariel Helwanis, the Luke Thomases, the Joe Rogans that really help bridge that gap for someone like myself that doesn't train to let me into the mentality of these fighters and how open the fighters are to talk about these struggles and these lessons that they're learning. That's my favorite part is, that was a great fight between Derek Brunson and Kevin Holland, but I'm so excited for that Monday morning to hear him come on Ariel Helwani and talk about that fight and say, what lessons?
Wasn't my best, though.
Yeah. And then over years, you can see these guys that just have all this talent, but just can't figure it out, and certain things holding them back. And sometimes as a fan, you can see it first and you can see what they're not admitting to, right? Like and then you can see them 2 years later, figure that thing out and take this huge leap forward. And like we talked about with the evolution of the sport, that never means you're going to be on top forever, but there's certain things that hold guys back and they don't even realize it at times. And it's just so much fun to be able to watch them evolve and to be open about that, right? Like I feel like one of the biggest things I see is how fighters respond to losses, and do they make excuses? Do they take accountability? I feel like that is almost, from the outside point of view, like I said, it almost seems like that is the biggest predictor of future success, is listening to them right after a loss and what they come up with in that week or 2 weeks after the fact.
Yeah, that's true. A big example of that was Joanna when she lost the belt, and then she just came out, blamed her team for weight cut issues.
Yeah, it was all nothing.
Which might all be true
for sure,
right? All that could have happened, but I think you got to take it on the chin.
For sure,
it's my fault.
Yeah,
I'll come back better.
Even if all the circumstances give you really good excuses, like if somebody is just completely unbiased, give you really excuses, you have to find the personal accountability within that, right? Sure, the weight cut was shitty and the pandemic and all this stuff was throwing things that you had to isolate, but you need to. None of that helps you. You can't grow from any of that. If you blame outside sources, there's no growth to be had. If you can find that personal accountability within all those things that still might be true, like you say, that is what's going to take you to the next level, right? And then you saw what happened after that fight when she made all the excuses and she came back and she lost again. And then it was less so excuses. I feel like she still made a little bit of excuses.
I think that was the Valentina fight. She came back and then, she just got dominated.
It was just a better fighter. But I feel like that was a big turning point for her. And I feel like still after that fight, she was a little bit more admitting to some of her own faults and still was making up a couple excuses, but then came back and won her next fight. And after that fight, she talked about herself realizing that she made those excuses, and then she came out and looked amazing. And then she had that fight against Zhang Wei Li, who's fighting this weekend.
Dude. Next weekend. That's
next. Oh, it is next weekend. Oh, I had a panic attack because I'm podcasting with I'm podcasting with Sean tomorrow night, and I'm gonna miss the Jake Paul fight and the
my man Ben.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I'm cheering for him. My heart is going for Ben, but my head is telling me Jake Paul's gonna take him out.
I have mixed emotions on that a little bit, but
I just
don't know how. A guy who has 2 amateur boxing fights. They're not even amateur.
No, they're
it's more an exhibition rules.
That would be a better way to put it.
I wouldn't even classify him as an amateur.
Right.
But the work ethic, the drive, the athleticism you need to be an Olympian,
an Olympic
make it
mindset,
to the Olympics, right?
And the jaw he's got too.
Yeah, you can take it. Yeah,
you see him in there with Robbie Lawler taking those balls. He's taking some
People
shit.
Give him a lot of crap for that knee he took, which. Whatever, man.
You throw Brock Lesnar in there to eat that knee. He's going fucking night-night.
Perfect time, perfect storm.
100%, right? His body weight going down, his body weight coming up. Like, there's nobody can withstand that.
Yeah. And a lot of people just liked it because he just talks a lot of smack.
He does. And he's hyper intelligent. That's one of my favorite part of, I like all different types of fighters, but one of my favorite types is the hyper intelligent fighter that almost doesn't even bring that out, right? Like my favorite example is Ryan Hall. When you listen to Ryan Hall talk, he is an elite level intelligence. He is thinking the game on the level of like the Trevor Whitmans and that, but in the cage with him, right? And he listens to his coaches, but he has such a, and it's almost even beyond the intellectual and into the philosophy of the fight, which I feel like is also a natural example. You see lots of guys reading books on, and maybe I could ask you, do you ever look at, you know, the philosophy of fighting and read on any books on kind of older, you know, the War of Art or Art of War? Art of War. Thanks.
I don't read. I listen to the books.
There you go. That's just as good. Even better. I think people can read at a certain words per minute, and we can listen way past that. And that listening skill is so much quicker. If you can get better at reading too, but it is a long slog. It's hard, and it'll probably take you years if you don't have a really good base. But listening, you can figure out how to listen to books better at such a more rapid pace because we're always listening to people talk, and that is way more of an ingrained. We've only been reading for, I don't know, a couple hundred years as a species. We've been listening for fucking ever. I think that is changing the game. Audiobooks and podcasts are changing the game because now it's allowing that huge barrier for people to take in information that, you know, if you're not a good reader, it's a really big barrier if you want to bring in that information. Now you can listen to it. It's amazing.
And it's like I thought I was a stupid kid, right? In school, I was like, oh man, I suck at reading. I suck at writing. Yeah. You know, and then little did I know, 10, 15 years later, all you need to do is listen and talk. Yeah. I'd be like, oh, cool. Yeah. You know, which I wouldn't have been so hard on myself.
Exactly. And I feel like, and what's tough too is those narratives stick so much. If you get told as a kid, or not even told, but just the scenario makes it in your head that you're stupid or that you can't read or all these things, you carry that with you. And now that is something that's holding you back, even though everybody knows you can work on those things and get better at it. Sure. That narrative holds you back, right? Like I always use the example of my sister growing up was very shy, right? When she was little, and she kind of got labeled that shyness. She grew out of that, you know, in her early teen years, but there was that narrative around that she was shy. So all the way up through high school, everyone saw her as shy, right? That label, and she kind of saw herself as shy until she went to university, and all those labels kind of dropped off in the narratives, and she could be whoever she wanted. Now, you know, you ask somebody from university, oh, is she shy? Well, maybe a little bit, but not really. She's, you know, pretty outgoing when in her moments, like probably an introvert, but you can see that. And it's just the power of those narratives that carry forward. And I feel like that's where if you can get in early enough to, maybe kids are in school saying the same thing, right? Like, oh, I'm just stupid, I can't do this. Well, hey, well, listen to these podcasts. I graduated from university and felt like I learned maybe a little bit. I didn't really get much out of it. I got way more of the social aspects, and I learned a lot maybe in the extracurricular activities around the university, not really in the classroom. I had a lot of fun, and I took a lot of lessons for that, and I wouldn't change it for the world. But then almost immediately after I graduated, I found podcasts. Right? I went into the workforce. I'm doing spreadsheets. I'm fucking hating my life. And I need something to just entertain myself. So I just started listening to podcasts, and I became addicted because I always loved to learn, but I always found school boring. And in the classes where it was interesting to me and I had a good teacher that would really get you invested, I would do awesome in those classes. But then if I was bored, or if I didn't think it was going to be useful for me to learn this information, I was going to do the bare minimum to get through. For sure, yeah. But now there's these podcasts where I was choosing them. It wasn't somebody, no, you have to listen to this. I could seek out whatever area, whatever passion I wanted to check out, and I could take that in. And I was so invested that I was learning it at a really rapid rate. And I was realizing, like, holy man, I never had that narrative that I was stupid. I was very lucky. You know, both my parents were helping instill the fact that, you know, you're intelligent and all that. So I always had that, but I feel like it wasn't really maximalized. I don't think I ever knew myself of what I was capable of. I had no idea how quickly I could learn and how, just what was available to me.
Sure. Yeah. And once you're interested in something, it's way more easier to learn it.
Exactly. And then I started listening to podcasts, and then I was getting better at listening. So then I was listening to them on 1.5 times speed, and then 2, and then 2.5, and then 3, right? Like, and now I'm just absolutely destroying this. I can listen to a 3-hour Joe Rogan conversation with a, you know, well, actually, I shouldn't say this because usually when he has the real smart guys on, the physicists, I crank that speed back down a little bit just to keep up. Okay. I shouldn't say that
a couple times.
Yeah. But even if I just want to laugh a bit, you know, you can have so many laughs per minute if you listen to him and comedians just shooting the shit, and you crank it right up, and you can just take in like 3 hours of the funniest content ever in like 1:15.
Exactly.
And it's amazing. And I just found that once I realized that, I was off to the races. And then it was a fact of like, I was getting frustrated that I wanted to do that for other people. And I just never thought I could, because you see all these guys like Joe Rogan that have all this money and these people running the boards here. And I just thought like, oh, well, maybe someday when I'm, you know, fuck you, rich, I can pay for all that. But
for sure. Yeah. He's an exception though. He was already rich when he started.
For sure.
It was just, he had fuck you money. He's like, I like talking to funny people. I'll set up a camera and see who listens. Right.
Exactly.
But some of my favorite podcasts are from the ground up. You know? They're trying, they're grinding every day. So,
And it's a passion. And I feel like that was what was holding me back, was that narrative of every podcast I listened to that I really enjoyed all kind of followed that same. It wasn't necessarily the fuck you money, but it was some sort of audience, some sort of jumping off point. Either it was the money just to invest in the stuff to make it so that you can build an audience quickly and it'll be professional and you can bring people in, or you can start off on your own, but you know that you have people listening, right? It was always like, I was listening to a bunch of comedians, a bunch of fighters, right? Like people that already had something.
Had an audience.
So in my head, I was like, I would fantasize all the time about, you know, all these little things that would get me that, whatever that was, whether it was some money or some, you know, winning the lottery or, you know, stopping a bank robbery or whatever it was, just to create that start. And then it occurred to me one day that if I'm passionate about this, and this is something I care about this much, I can just go online and buy the equipment and just start.
Kind of do it yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And every podcaster I heard talk about always just said, like, the only thing is just get started. Just the longer you wait, the longer it's going to take you to get better. You're going to suck at the start. You're going to have to get better at it. But if you wait 2 years to get started, now that's 2 years of practice time that you didn't have.
Exactly.
So from the day that I realized that I don't need to wait for anybody, I can just order this. I had all the equipment ordered that day and I was scared shitless. I was like, holy fuck, I'm in. I didn't tell anybody at that point. I just knew that everything was on order from Amazon. I was just hoping, okay, let's just hope it doesn't come for like 3-4 weeks. And sure enough, of all the Amazon orders that, you know, yeah, exactly. Yeah, 2 days later it shows up and you're like, shit, now
it's real. Yeah.
Now I'm really in this and I got to start figuring it out. Right. And then you tell a couple people and you start building a spreadsheet of all the you know, the big moonshot goals of the people to have on. Right. Yeah. And you know, different topics like MMA, right? Like I would have an MMA fighter on, or an MMA coach, or somebody within the MMA world. If I could talk MMA with someone every day, I would.
Sure, yeah.
Right? Like, I feel like right now I have this podcast, which is so nice that I can have whatever interests me. I have authors, I have fighters, I have, you know, philosopher, whatever I want to have on, I can. But now I also have the opportunity that if I want to index into one area like MMA, I can. I have complete freedom to that. And that makes me feel so good about the future of what I'm doing with this,
you can do, yeah,
right? And
possible,
it's really fun for me. And I feel like this journey has just given me so much. And now I'm just enjoying it so much that I can't even get enough. I'm so excited. I get excited all week to come up to Lloyd like this and, you know I'm going to have 3 or 4 really good interviews, some real fun guys to sit down with that I can really, you know, shoot the shit on stuff that I'm passionate about. That's awesome. Like nothing gets me that excited.
Yeah, exactly.
And I imagine that's probably like you of, you know, fighting and finding that it's just such a passion that's so unifying that all the other stuff almost it doesn't fall away, but it quiets, right? Because that is the one area that you've known that you want to pursue.
Yeah, it is a interesting year.
Yeah, I bet.
I've been at this for about 5-6 years now, training.
Yeah.
And 2 times a day, never miss a class, all this stuff, running in the mornings, all that stuff. And then a whole year off, right? No training, no gym, no teammates, no the camaraderie, nothing like that.
The identity that you build around it, right?
Yeah, I guess I did. Yeah. So that was I guess a positive. You really had to branch out and be like, oh, I guess I'm not just a fighter. I gotta, you know, once that's taken away from me, what am I?
Right.
So, you know, but it's more than just the team.
Yeah.
I just love the camaraderie again, and just you beat the crap out of each other, you know, and then you hug it out, shoot the shit, have some beers, whatever after training, all this stuff. That's what I miss the most about that. So,
and I would imagine too that it'd be nice to be surrounded by like-minded people too that are also
dedicated,
dedicated and striving for something difficult. I find that this is a difficult venture for myself, and I find that I more and more find myself wanting to surround myself with people that are chasing something difficult, that aren't taking the easy way out. And I find that if you had that already, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. If I found that in my area, right? Like say I had a whole bunch of really dedicated podcasters that I was surrounding myself with and got to interact with every day, and then that's taken away from you. That is a whole nother sociological issue that comes, or not an issue, but just a hurdle that you're also dealing with too, that who you're surrounded with is a very big part of your happiness, right? Like there's always those sayings, there's a bunch of cliches, like you show me your 5 closest friends, I'll show you your future or whatever. And all those kind of things, right? And they're cliches for a reason. It's very important. And I feel like for everybody, I mean, this is kind of our 2 passions that we're talking about, but we could have this conversation about anybody right now, but what they've had taken away during this pandemic, right?
Exactly.
Which is actually, I had an episode come out today that I recorded last weekend just about my feelings on all this COVID stuff and the regulations and what that is. And kind of my big takeaway of it was, sure, we have to be smart and take all this stuff to heart, but there's also people that are really passionate about certain things. And you have to take that into account with what you're trying to restrict, right? Like if somebody's life goal is to chase the dream of being a fighter,
sure,
who are you to say that that you're going to hold that back? Who's to say that by you restricting that, you're taking away such an important piece of who they are, that risk for them, even if it's I'm just going to invent this, but even if it's a fighter that's completely immunocompromised, he's the one person where if he does get sick, he's going to be in real trouble. Mm-hmm. That still might be worth the risk for him, that he's going to risk death. You're a fucking fighter. You risk death every day.
Exactly.
Right? Like who is to say that they can make that call?
But to bring it out of fighting, if you're if you were an immigrant, you come to this country, right? Mm-hmm. And you opened up a restaurant or another local mm-hmm. business mm-hmm. and you had a future,
right?
And a dream and a goal that I'm going to succeed in this country, rain, sun or shine, right?
100%.
And then the government's like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
Yeah. It's tough.
I came here because it was free. And now you're telling me I can't do this?
Yeah. Freedom isn't free. That's another one of those cliches that you got to fight for. And that's where I see is, you're right. It's whatever that is for that person. And for me, that thing is podcasting, right? Like I would love to go back and do jiu-jitsu. I'm not that worried about getting COVID and all that stuff, or the risks that come along with training jiu-jitsu. In the gym in Grand Prairie that I went to has stood up, even though they're supposed to be closed. They said, hey, we're not fucking closing. You know, like we believe that this is worth the risk, and they're doing that. And I love that. And that just fills my heart up to see guys doing that. I think we need more of that. I think people,
I believe that too. Yeah.
But I agree that it's what that is for each person. But I don't think that everybody has that. And I think there's some people that, so for my one thing is podcasting. I said, like, I want to go back and do jiu-jitsu, but my one thing that I'm going to concentrate on is this podcast. And I'm going to say, I bought a treadmill and all the workout equipment to go home. I really like going to the gym, but I'm going to take that risk away so that I can put the risk onto this. Because if I'm going to say that I'm still being smart about this, and I'm going to sit down with people like you, I want to be able to respect you in that way, that I am doing everything I can to be smart other than this, so that I can keep doing this. Cause this is my one passion, and whatever I have to do to make sure I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to do it. But now you look at people that don't have that. They just go to work every day. They don't have any passions. And now I think there's also a big part of people that pisses them. I wouldn't even say this is a conscious thing, but I think subconsciously it hurts people to see people chasing a dream. And if they don't have that, if they don't have anything that's worth risking COVID for, how can you even have the mind frame to even understand someone like you or me that does have something to risk it for? I feel like that is a huge disconnect that we're not laying out and seeing and talking about. And I feel like if we talked about that and brought that more to light, that would really change how people are looking at it. Because I think it's really easy for someone that, like you say, fuck, I don't want to go back to work. I hated work. This is the best thing. This COVID is the best thing that's ever happened.
Stay home.
Yeah, this COVID is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't have to go into work and talk to these fucking idiots that I hate every day that was draining my life.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm not saying that's everybody. I'm not even saying that's the majority. But to deny that is a piece of this, and those, if you want to guess who's going to be those people that are the most vocal on social media, calling out this stuff and rattling the neighbors, I would bet all my money that those are the people doing that stuff, right? And now it's, how has these big vocal people now dictated policy, right? Like
that police officer in Calgary who tried to arrest the guy skating.
Yeah, Ocean Wise.
What are you doing?
Yeah, like, that kid who's, you know, a really good hockey player. His whole family's really good hockey players, and they're moral and they're valued, right? Like that is just, and that kind of stuff. I think that highlights the big issue that this pandemic has highlighted in spades. People don't do very well with power. Mm-hmm. You need to have a whole bunch of accountability to negate power. And for every level of power you give, you have to have equal accountability to go with it. And you see that this pandemic has given everybody so much power and no accountability, right? Yeah. And no responsibility and no consequences to their actions and what they're saying, right? So now you just see people, you can hop on social media and talk all this mad shit with no consequences, right? And no accountability. And that's the problem. You've just given an entire society this great power with no earning it and no accountability with it. Yeah. And you see what happens. And now clearly shit's falling apart a little bit. But to me, that is very obvious that would happen if this is the route that you took. And I think it's kind of a route that we're already on. We're kind of already on these tracks because I think social media did this even before the pandemic. I think when social media arrived on the scene, it gave a lot of people a lot of power. It gave them a voice. They didn't do anything to earn it.
Didn't have a voice.
And they didn't have to do a lot to earn it. And they don't have a lot of accountability because they have a little egg emoji for their face, like a fake name. There's no accountability there. You're completely uncensored to say whatever you want and get whatever venom or whatever hurt and traumas within you out to whoever you want. There's no accountability, right? That is a dangerous slide all on its own. Then you add in a pandemic to it and it kind of just cranks everything up to 10, right? It's one of those things. It's
interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Very, weird time to, so I couldn't imagine being a teenager right now, dude.
Oh,
with all that social media stuff. Like I'm so happy it was on the tail end.
Yeah.
Of my high school that Facebook came out.
Yeah.
And all this
I got Facebook in grade 7.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it was, but we had stuff before that. We had Nexopia was the big one that we had kind of in grade 4, 5, 6. But the amount of like looking back in the moment, you don't recognize this, but now when you look back on it, the amount of trauma and pain that people felt through that, like kids are mean.
Sure.
And not even in what you'd think of as an adult of what mean is. You just don't understand. You're so insecure about yourself that you do mean things without even realizing you're doing it because you're just trying to protect yourself and just trying to make it through because everybody's scared. Everyone doesn't know who they are. Everyone's in that same boat.
It's very primal. Kids are very primal.
It is, right? And there's some consequences can come with that. But that is all kind of restricted. When you're a kid, you're not supposed to have much power. You're not supposed to have much actionable effect on the world. That's kind of the trade-off, right? You don't deserve the actionable effect on the world. But now you're in grade 5, 6. You get social media. What have you just got?
Exact
power, right? And you've given it to them, and they don't deserve it yet. By no fault of their own, they just don't have enough life experience to deserve that yet. And you see what happens. And now that kid that's had social media and had this so-called power since they were in grade 6 is now a 25-year-old, 30-year-old adult, and they've been. Not only have they not been trained on how to use power, they've been actually oppositely, they've been mistrained with how to use it. And they have this whole...
And never had accountability.
Had accountability, exactly, right? Yeah. And so much of, it's a great thing and a bad thing, but everything turning to online, so many less people got punched in the face.
Exactly, yeah.
And so many people, it was almost these two inverse lines that were going up and away from each other is the amount of people... getting punched in the face is way less, and the amount of people doing shit online that deserves to be punched in the face went way up, right? So now that accountability of just the normal life accountability of you see people, and I think myself as a big fight fan, not a tough guy myself, wouldn't do very good in a fight, whatever, sure. It being fully upfront about that, I have way more respect for how I treat people. I am not assuming anything about people because I know that I'm not going to, go swear at a guy or go start some shit. Because what if he fucking comes out and, throws a 3-piece combo at me with the soda and I'm fucking sleeping on the ground? I don't want that. Yeah. But I understand that. But people are so far removed. They have this idea of what violence is in their head from online, and they have no real world experience of what that is and what real consequences are. Because you look at consequences and what are consequences when you follow everything out, it kind of goes back to violence at each point, right? Like if you look at consequences of what the law is, they enforce that with violence, right? If you don't, and sometimes they say, no, it's with fines and stuff. Well, what happens if you don't pay that fine? You go to jail. Yeah. Well, what if you don't want to go to jail? They enforce that with violence. They will come bodily remove you. And everything comes back to violence our whole societal structure is based on violence, and our whole understanding of what violence is has been so pulled away.
Exactly.
So we don't understand our own society. We don't understand the underpinnings of the mechanisms that all this stuff works with. And then you wonder why it goes off the rails. It's very obvious. And I feel like people that are around the MMA world have, or wrestling or jiu-jitsu, just anything sure. that has you, anything in the combat world really gives you a piece of that. And I don't think many guys, like I don't think Justin Gaethje is talking about his understanding of the societal underpinnings of violence and all that when he does it, right? But I think you don't need to realize that to get some of the benefits of it, right? To have the understanding of violence, you don't need to intellectually understand it. You have a real understanding. You have a deeper understanding. You understand the spirit of it because you've been involved in it. Mm-hmm. You've been in that violence. You've caused that violence. You've received that violence. So you have that understanding, and you see people that are in this world are some of the most humble, have
nicest people,
nicest people because they understand that and they understand the consequences. And then you see some of the people that are the quickest to, get up and start a bar fight, or using the most insecure people that don't want to fight, don't want to do any of this, but that's the most scared because that's what they've been trained to do. And that's their reaction to it. And it's so obvious once you understand all of it. But for somebody that just, you know, like my mom that can't stand, if I have MMA on the TV, she is running out of the room with her hands over her eyes because she can't stand it. And I understand that too. I don't want to, you know, demonize that, because I think that's a big part of the population where just something in them is just, they can't watch it. And even myself, you know, some like when Stipe took that last punch from Francis, yeah, like that shocks me to my core, right? Like, and I watch this shit every weekend, usually, you know, twice, you know, once on Friday, once on Saturday, you know, maybe catch a Wednesday one card or something too. Like I'm deep in the shit, and it still affects me. So I don't want to blame people for being averse to it. I can understand that, but
you'd be a pretty big sociopath if it didn't feel any empathy.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest things I found as I get deeper into the sport is now, it used to be when I first kind of got into it, is I had my few favorites and I'd be really excited to watch them fight.
Sure.
But now it seems like it's rare that on the top half of a card, I won't know intimately both sides of that fight. And now it's way harder. Like the first big one that came up was when TJ and Cody Garbrandt fought the first time.
Sure, yeah.
And I was such a big fan of both of them. And I found 2 days leading up, I'm shaking, like I'm almost hyperventilating. I'm so nervous for this fight because I love these guys. Don't want to see either of them lose, right?
Yeah.
And now that happens all the time. I'm finding every second weekend it's a fight like that where I'm just so riled up for it, because I feel like when it's somebody that you don't like, or not even don't like, because I find as I got into sport, there's maybe one or two guys that I don't like in the sport. And even that, it's just antics, and I'm sure they're a good person.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's like, just to have no investment on the other side, now you can root and be excited. And the only risk you're having is that you have a 50-50 shot. It's never 50-50, but close enough for what you're getting at. A 50-50 shot of you feeling that amazing excitement of seeing someone you're really behind win on that primal level. Like watching my beloved Oilers win is a very strong feeling, but watching a fighter that I've watched for years and know intimately who they are, interviews, and sometimes they have a podcast. So now every week you're listening to them for an hour at a time, right? Probably I listen to them more than any of my closest friends. I don't talk to any of my closest friends for an hour a week consistently.
Yeah, exactly.
And now they're going in to do almost the highest physical risk and, like the highs and lows, like the most risk, but the highest reward, like winning a fight in front of millions of people watching is in your underwear is so primal. It is something else. But now you find that, and it's such a different thing when they're the guy on the other side. So now you watch them lose, and that's a strong feeling. But to go into a fight knowing you're going to feel that really downside of it is countered because you get to see the one guy win. But I find myself all the time, it's like I'm cheering and cringing at the same time when I'm watching these fights. But that I find that makes it all the more beautiful to me, and I'm enjoying it even more with that.
That's one of the things I liked about the UFC is doing now is the thrill and the agony after the fights. It's like this little video, and you really get to see the human side of the win side and the loss side. So the empathy really strikes for both. You're like,
right.
You know? Right. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And I find because of that, my investment in the sport overall and the other aspects, like I'm a big sports guy to begin with, right? Like I like other sports, and I find that almost every week MMA is knocking other sports down and just moving itself up. And I would say it's probably my favorite sport now, even though I'm a hockey guy through and through, love the Oilers, all that. I think, you know, I know this because the other night, it was a while back, but there was a pay-per-view card and an Oilers-Calgary game on, and I had them side by side on my computer, and I just was like, one of these is going to draw my attention, right? You can't watch both. You're going to have to, you know, and I tried to watch both, but my eyes kept going to the MMA, right? Like I would never miss a Battle of Alberta 2 years ago even, right?
Sure,
like
yeah.
It was just not going to happen. And now I can see that. But where I'm going with that is I'm so invested in these fighters and this sport that now I care about things that I've never cared about in any other sport. I don't care about hockey players' pay. You know, fighter pay is a real big aspect to me, and I really care deeply about that, right? The rules of the sport, the judging, these type of things that kind of what we started this conversation with the evolution of the sport and that it's growing. That's kind of one of the low points, is that we are still figuring out all these other things, and still it's getting traction and becoming a mainstream sport. And I feel like, unfortunately, the fighters are paying the price for that.
I agree with that too. I just want to know what kind of bumps and bruises the NFL went through. NHL, like
for sure,
20 years in when they first started.
Yeah,
right. That's how old the sport is. Like 25 years, 30 years now, right?
Yeah.
So there's gonna be hurdles to overcome and stuff. The goal is to get UFC fighters pay the same as hockey players.
Exactly.
Boxers, all the same, right?
And it's going to happen, especially
there.
Yeah.
you know, it's just a matter of time. And yeah, you just can't forget the guys who started this, the pioneers, all these guys who got it to the point where it could be.
Yeah, where it gave them that starting off point to make all this happen, right? When you see where the sport is today, and especially throughout the pandemic, the sport has grown. You know, like of everything, it's almost hard to even think of anything other than, you know, Amazon and Walmart and stuff that really grew throughout the pandemic that did well.
Sure.
But MMA as a sport, I think the numbers were kind of, you know, dipping a little bit on their pay-per-view numbers when you just look at just pure numbers, not even all the other things that come along with it of like the diehardness of all these guys that are listening to, you know, the fact that, you know, there can be that many MMA reporters that all do shows throughout the weekend can all be really successful. I think that is also really important metrics that show, sure, you have 1 million people watch, but you have 1 million people watch hockey, but I don't know if you have 1 million people that are tuning into an extra 4 or 5 hours of content throughout the week for the next weekend for the next hockey game, right? Exactly. Like that's also a different thing too. And the amount of monetization you can make off of your fans, I think that also, people always just look at numbers, and I don't think that shows the full picture of where MMA is on that grand scale. I feel like people still think that MMA is below the major four. I think it's just as big, if not bigger, when you take all those other factors into it. I think that is.
I think the MMA fans, they any content that you put out, they devour it. So,
yeah, it's awesome.
And a true testament is there's fights every week.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's fights every weekend. Just about, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing well. Dana White's making enough money.
Yeah. Yeah.
He freaking bought a goddamn island.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to do this myself.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like,
which is interesting too, because this is something we were kind of got into before the podcast. We said maybe we'll save it because not only is it hard to be that first against the wall and the first one to start continuing the sports like the UFC was. I shouldn't even say MMA because it was mainly just the UFC that did this, but just to push forward and say like, no, this is important. We're, regardless of what restrictions you put in place, we're still going to do this. We're still moving forward. And they were the first against the wall. And that's one part of the equation. But then the second part of it is it's expensive.
Oh yeah.
That was the biggest thing. And that's what, you know, I didn't realize right at the start of the pandemic, but then when they were talking about, I think it was actually Dana White in an interview that was talking about it. He just said like, we can afford to do this because we know how to run and because we are not a legacy sport, right? It's hard for the NFL is a big ship to turn, right? There's so many people, so much bureaucracy of it. They don't really have the freedom just to change on a dime and change the dynamic of how they do things. They have
sponsors,
owners, they have so much of that stuff. And then, so now you say, oh, if you want to run your league, it's going to cost you 200% of the cost that it cost you a year before because you have to bring in all these pandemic things.
Isolate the fighters. You got to pay for hotels more. And
100%. You need to have, you know, extra medical staff on hand for these types of things. You have to, you know, even all the testing for media and all this stuff. Like, there's so much things that go into it. And that's what Dana was saying is not only are we the ones taking the risk, but we're paying the cash. He said, I think you're going to see leagues not start up, not because they can't do it safely, but because they can't afford it. Right. And that was a huge insight. I said, holy shit, I didn't even think of that. Like there's a big financial cost, which is so amazing to me to see that pay off in spades for them and to see them because they took that risk and threw that cash out on the line and to see it pay back and the numbers in the sport growing, like, and also just the fact that they just got the ESPN deal before that. Yeah. And the fact that that was there's been, I think you could point to probably, you know, 5 or 6 really big, huge steps that brought MMA into the mainstream, right? Like getting the Fox deal and all those kind of things, right? There was all these big steps, but I think ESPN was huge. And I think in Canada, we can't even see the only reason I know the impact of this is because I listen to so many, you know, American-based MMA shows, but what a big deal that is. ESPN in the States is everything of having those highlights running all the time, seeing the names, you know, throwing the rankings up during the week when, you know, the average sports fan
5-minute bit of they're talking about the next fights coming up.
Huge. Like that is huge. And then for that to happen just before carry over into this and then to see the sport just absolutely ascend to the heights that people that were within it knew that it would get to eventually. Because I think when you understand the sport to the level that somebody that's in it does, you know that this is unlike any other sport. It draws you in a way that you've never seen before. Even like a guy like myself that's watched almost every sport at least a little bit, right? And been able to enjoy it. Nothing's ever grabbed me like this. And it's like, oh, it's hard to, again, it's not as user friendly. I mean, you'd think fighting is the most fan-friendly thing because who doesn't understand a fight of what's going on? But
exactly, yeah.
when you take jiu-jitsu and wrestling into it and the scoring,
the technical side, and the scoring and the judging, and what they're looking for, which all needs to be revamped a little bit.
For sure it does. That's something I'm very interested to ask you about because that's something I'm very passionate about as well.
But but I still think like any casual watch kind of understand what's going on. I think the announcers now do a lot better of kind of explaining.
Yes.
They kind of dumb things down just for those casual fans, which is good. I mean, you got to kind of stick with it to really fully understand it.
But what I see of what makes it happen, what makes guys stick with it is, what's a good way to explain this? So if you're watching hockey and you don't really understand hockey, you can kind of get the gist of what's going on. Oh, they're trying to put the puck in the net. There's certain times where they blow the whistle, like, oh, what's an offside? What's an icing, right? Like those things are kind of hard to understand. But the more you watch it, the more of those little things somebody explains to you and helps you, your enjoyment grows, right? And I find with MMA, there's so many steps. I feel like there's so much more of that where almost every time you watch a fight, you're going to learn something that makes your enjoyment that much better for the next time. And then I also think because they do such a good job with the other side of it, I think fighters are leading the way with it of having their own podcast and them being open with their vulnerability is what makes that. I think the fighters being so open, and I think that's just part of being a fighter, is you have to be honest with yourself or you're not going to do very well. Sure, yeah. I think that brings it out of it. And then that makes it so that now the journalists covering the sport have so much more to work with, right? If you're an MMA journalist compared to an NHL journalist, the types of interviews and the type of interaction you're going to get,
a raw interview with a fighter,
is going to be so much different. But now as a fan, once you realize that, oh man, this is like, I love sports, but I hate listening to like every time they pull a guy in for a intermission interview on the NHL, it is the boringest shit. It's like, why are we doing this? Why are we still pretending we're doing it? Like, just tell them to say no to it, right? Or there's a couple, I shouldn't say it because there's a couple guys in the NHL that will do it and they're great interviews, right? And they really ride those guys. But in the UFC or in MMA in general, that's almost the exception to the rule to have a guy that doesn't give you a lot, right? That is, and there's still those guys, but you need that too, and that keeps the rest of it interesting. To have those guys that are mysterious that don't let you balance in, it's awesome because now you have the mixture. Because there's going to be guys that like that too, that are a traditional sports fan. They don't want to know too much about their fighters. They want just to be that
clean cut, quick answer.
Yeah, that mysterious killer, kind of what Khabib was a couple years ago, right? Like where he's really opened up now, and you've seen a lot more of his personality. But for a while there, you didn't really know much about who this guy was, except that he was
on location.
Yeah, exactly. Just fucking absolute savage, right? Yeah. But I feel like now for the fans is there's so many of those little steps that they can take that ups their enjoyment of it every time. It's that it sucks you in so quick. I find that like people, and what I've really enjoyed and I didn't realize, and I feel like is maybe it's definitely a misunderstanding I have, but I think other people have this as well, is once I started this podcast, and I was never a social media guy, I hated social media to do that, but now with the podcast, I have to. So what am I going to post and I just do it through the podcast page and stuff, but what am I going to post? Things I'm passionate about. So every time there's a UFC card on, I'm usually throwing stuff up, like my thoughts on it, like, holy fuck, I'm pumped for this fight. Like, you got to see this one. Like, oh, what a walkout song. Yep. And the amount of female UFC fans that know this fucking sport, that have reached out to me, that have been people I've known that I knew from university, and I just never knew they even knew of the sport, and you'd be like, oh, what do you think about this fight coming up? I'm like, holy shit, let's go.
You're invested. Yeah.
They are invested. That gets me so excited for the health of the sport long term. And just the fact that in MMA, unlike any other sport, the women are on the exact same level as the men now. And I think if you asked me that probably 4 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I think you could see a big step, but you cannot watch that Joanna fight versus Zhang Weili and not say that is.
I don't think I've seen a greater fight. Like,
me neither. I think that is I think that, yeah, like I would, it's like picking your favorite child. You just can't, right? But I would take, like that fight, Izzy and Kelvin Gastelum, probably 2 or 3 more that I can think of. Yeah. And I would you could ask me on any different day and I would say that is my favorite fight. But I would, to say that Joanna and Zhang Weili fight is my favorite fight. You know what? I wouldn't. I would see an argument for that. Like, that is quite possibly the greatest fight of all time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. It's a sport where it doesn't matter the gender. The skill level is always there. Yeah. Right. And I don't know if that's going to sound sexist, but female basketball isn't the same as the NBA.
It's not.
And
not
even close.
And it's hard to understand. It's almost because and here's my take on why that is. I think because the rules of basketball is finding ways, like there's certain rule sets of the game and the structure and the court and the heights of the baskets and all that. And then you are trying to take your natural abilities and find ways to perfect your
task.
The task and the way you build your body and the way you use your body within that. And there's so many different ways, whereas there's not any other than the rules that prevent you from doing certain techniques. It's the exact same, right? Like it's all within you and what you can do with your body. And I feel like because there's all those different levels of you understanding, and I feel like it also might be a thing where just it needs more time and more evolution. Like women's basketball might catch up to where the skill is just like, and I wouldn't have said that 4 or 5 years ago until I saw women's MMA. And when I can see that fight that we talked about and to see that skill level and where they are, and they're, if not better than half the men in some of these divisions, you know, right on par with them. 100%. And to see that, oh no, that is not something that was innate, like my own innate sexism that I grew up with, and it's just kind of, you know, whatever. I don't have any guilt surrounding. I think that's people trying to make you feel guilty about that is so stupid. It's just natural history.
It's just honesty too.
Yeah. And it's just honesty. If I never would have thought that those heights could be achieved. I would have guessed at that time that it'd be just like basketball, that, oh, these women fighters are getting better, but they'll never reach those heights. And then to see in 3 or 4 years, oh no, they're here now. Yeah, and they're here to stay. Yeah. And it's going to get more. There's going to be more women's divisions. There's going to be more people so now you see this in the last 4 years, what women's MMA has become. And now you see all those, you know, 10, 12-year-old girls that are seeing that now and starting in the gym. And now it's not, you see a lot of the high level athletes in the sport right now is kind of what we talked about, where you usually have you were passionate about wrestling or you're passionate about kickboxing, you got into that, and then you eventually transition it. But now we're seeing these kids come up like Sage Northcutt, who was training everything, jiu-jitsu, stand-up, wrestling, from the time he was a little kid to now come up. And we're going to be seeing so many more of that coming up, because now
MMA is its own.
Yeah, and you can go and train MMA.
Just MMA.
Yeah, whereas before you couldn't do that, or you could only do that in a certain amount of hotspots across the world where you could go there and you could train a full, well-rounded MMA, right? You could go to AKA down the States. You could go to, you know, Jackson Wink and do that. But now for that to be popping up all over the place and have that be, and to have there be money in it, and to have there be acclaim, and this is happening slowly, but losing its kind of stink of being this barbaric thing that nobody wants to look at. And it's kind of, you know, the redheaded stepchild of the sports world that's falling off more and more each year. All those things together are just growing what the sport is going to be. And for as much as, and I feel like we're seeing the results of that. I feel like if we had this conversation 5 years ago, we'd be saying the same things and we'd be seeing it happen. And I feel like just in my reinvigorate, I was always a fan. I loved watching the UFC. I think I told you this before the fight, but my parents were not big fans of it, so I couldn't really have it on at the house. And I really got back into it in probably 2015, 2016 is when but even in that time, let's call it 5 years, that sport has changed so much, and it's so good. So, because I remember when I first started watching it, my dad was watching me get it, and he enjoys it too. He just doesn't, he's one of those people that's a casual fan, right? Like if he likes to watch it with me because I can explain things to him, and he kind of gets it. Or if it's a really big card, I'll tell him like, hey, you can't miss this one. But I remember at the start, I'd tell him to watch the pay-per-views, and every once in a while there'd be a fight night card where I'd be like, oh, like you got to watch this one. There's some real good fights on it. And then more and more he'd ask me, I'd be like, yeah, we got to catch this one. This one. Now he asks me, I'm like, if you want to watch good fights, you got to watch every weekend. Yeah. Every weekend's card is amazing. And that I got to watch it. And I might be wrong where I just didn't know enough of the fighters. So I wasn't as invested, didn't know a lot of the fighters on the undercards and all that. And that's just me, the natural progression of my own fandom of understanding that.
For sure.
But I truly think that the level of the fighters has gone up so much, and the level of fights you're seeing all the way down the card, you're going to see excitement. And it seemed like when in 2015, when I started watching, every once in a while, there'd be kind of a bad fight, you know, where the guys either just gas out, they weren't prepared, and it turns into sloppiness, or
somebody just hold them down.
Yeah.
Somebody's doing damage.
Yeah. Somebody's so well trained in this one aspect that when it's anywhere else in the fight, they just look lost in there. And that just cheapens the whole sport. When you watch that in the middle, when you're rolling, you're just seeing this high level stuff, and then it kind of breaks up the flow. You never see that anymore. I haven't seen that in years. I haven't seen a bad fight, you know, like,
it might not be entertaining or what you want as a casual fan, that clean knockout, but
right.
Yeah,
everything. But that skill level is there, right? Like even fights like, I'm trying to think of one, Darren Till, Robert Whittaker.
Sure.
I saw, and I think a lot of people enjoyed that, but I think that was one of my favorite fights I've seen in the last couple of years. Like I would put that in maybe one of my top 10 fights, but it wasn't that clean knockout. It wasn't just slobber knocker. Like it was calculated. It was just feints all the time. But when you understood the high level of what was happening in there, that was poetry. That was some of the most amazing just athletics I've ever seen. And just to see that high level of it, but
the problem solving,
it was so amazing to watch. And I feel like that's where I feel so almost grateful that I understand the sport to that level extent, that I could enjoy that, because I feel like if that fight would have happened 3 years earlier and I wasn't at this point in my fandom, I wouldn't have got to enjoy it. I'd be like, oh, like it was all right, but they didn't throw as many punches. There wasn't as much action. My understanding of what action has changed. As the more I get in the sport, the more action you see, because when you only know action as a punch landing or somebody almost getting submitted with an arm bar, because that's the submission, that's the only action you can see in a fight. You're missing all the action of the feints. You're missing, a guy throwing in a fake takedown to get him thinking in different things, and how much you learn about the mental side of overloading someone's brain, of all these feints, all these different looks you're giving them. That is psychologically draining, because you need to take all that stuff in and process that all. And that's exactly what you got to see while
not getting punched in the
face. Right. And if you make one tiny mistake, just the smallest zig when you should have zagged, wrong foot position, all these things, didn't have your hands up, it's over. It's night for that, and try again in 6 months, a year sometimes. Yeah. Like
it depends on the fight. Not every fight, like as a fan, you got to accept not every fight can be a Zhang Weili, Joanna.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
These fighters need to prolong their careers. They're not. I mean, you have those guys that just go out, right? But these guys are calculated. They're like, I want a career out of this, right? I only have so many.
Exactly. Fights. Yeah.
They're always down for those battles and wars, but sometimes you got to be like, take the easy road out.
Yeah.
Outscore.
And a lot of the times too is sometimes that is a strategy. Now it's that let's stand in the center and bang is a strategy that you can pull out when you need it. You're down on the cards and you can suck a guy into that kind of fight. You have that in but just to pull that out every time. Exactly. That he knows he has that in his tool bag. Very much Justin Gaethje too, right? Like Justin Gaethje, what we've seen his evolution of what he's doing lately. You think he doesn't have it in his bag to just fucking drop all that shit and go out and just chin down, let him fly and stand with somebody? I think he's still probably the elite of the elite at that style.
Control that.
But now he's got it controlled. But now if ever he's, trying that kind of point fighting, throwing the leg kicks for a 5-round fight and he's 4 rounds in and it's just not working for him, and he knows, hey, I'm down 3-1 on the scorecard. I know I got that in my bag where I can just bite down and swing. If I'm going to
lose, I'm going out swinging.
Exactly. Yeah. Now he's got that. Now it wasn't just now it's not his only thing that he's got. Now he's got all of that, all these tool sets, right? And he's got his wrestling that again is, we haven't seen it much in the UFC, but we know he has that from way back, right? Like that he was
allegedly. Yeah.
I know that's what allegedly. That's what everyone keeps saying. It doesn't seem like it. Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it, and I wonder if it is still there, because I don't
evolution.
know how much he trains.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that's the thing. Like you excelled so much at this one thing that you're like, oh, I'll just keep it. Like I have this forever.
Yeah.
But you don't train it, so if you don't use it, you lose it, right?
Just like I was listening to actually on the way down to Edmonton last night. I made the rest of the trip to here this morning. I was listening to Ariel Helwani. He was interviewing Tony Ferguson, and he was talking about that fight with Charles Oliveira the other day, and he was saying he only did 5 hours of jiu-jitsu training the whole fight camp for it, and he was saying that he had a bunch of plans in place and COVID kind of messed it up. He was supposed to do a bunch of fight week training where he's going to bring in his guys. But I would have to imagine that the only reason you would ever only do 5 hours of jiu-jitsu training for a guy like Charles Oliveira, even knowing that you were going to have time during fight week, but that you would leave it to that point, is exactly what we're talking about, of assuming that Tony was such a jiu-jitsu wizard for how long that he just assumed he was there. And he didn't get tapped by that armbar, but his arm was fucked after that, right? Like that is one of those things where you watch and you just... And it's moments like that too it makes you so thankful to be a fan, but to understand what he's in that position and to know what kind of mental toughness that guy has.
Yeah.
And then to just keep going and keep fighting that round or not that round because the bell saved him, but the rest of that fight, it was amazing to see. And I feel like that level of understanding that you can get for the sport just makes it such a fun thing to follow. And that's where I'm excited to be able to have these types of conversations, have people that listen to me that maybe we're a casual fan, but didn't understand more of the underlying things. And if I can just maybe one of these things clicks with them of, hey, I really enjoy that. Like, hey, maybe I'll check that aspect out. Maybe because I feel like my enjoyment of the sport is from so many different angles. And one of the biggest ones I really think is the storylines. Sure. Right? Like, there's no, when you look at a sport like the NHL, the NFL, there's storylines there for sure. They're just not as good as telling them. And a lot of times it's not as status quo for them to be as open about those stories. But also after a certain point, when they get into the NFL, a bunch of the stories kind of blend together because now you're in the NFL, you're getting paid. Everybody's life as an NHL player is very much similar, right? You're going to have your own little personalities to it, but fighting's not like that. It's not like once you reach the UFC, everybody's journey is the same, more or less the same, right? Like it does definitely get closer, but you want to talk about a guy like Justin Gaethje in the journey he's had, or a Francis Ngannou in the story that he's had, and where they've gone, and you talk about like just it's almost like a soap opera. You see guys leaving camps and like Kamaru Usman leaving to go to team up with Trevor Whitman in Colorado and see the evolution that you can have. Or here's my all-time favorite one. Just the other day, or I guess it wasn't the other day now, but Brian Ortega. He goes out and he was winning. He was a jiu-jitsu phenom, absolutely great on the ground. You know, his stand-up, he was just a tough motherfucker, right? Dog. Sure. And he would rely on that and try and stand and bang. And then if it looked like there was no way he's winning this fight, he'd pull these submissions out of his ass in the last round all the time. And that got him very far. And then he found when it didn't, he got up against Max Holloway. He realized, I am not where I need to be. And I don't know how long was in between that fight and when he came back.
It was a long time. Yeah, like almost 2 years.
Yeah. Like closer to 2 years than one, I'd say.
And I've followed the sport enough. You're like, this isn't good. This is going to go one of two ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Usually it doesn't go that way.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Which is exactly where I was. And I was a huge Ortega fan, right? Because I feel like one of my big entry points into the sport was Brendan Schaub. He was one of those guys that I started listening when I first found podcasts. He was one of the first guys, and he listened to him talk about a real fighter, talk about this and give you the real insights of what's going on and what a fight camp is and how tough this shit is. It just gave me such an understanding. And he was close with Brian and his team. He was training with them since he was like 14 or whatever. So I was always very much behind Ortega, and I was so scared. Exactly what you're thinking. Fuck, we haven't seen him in 2 years. Like, oh my God, like how rusty is he going to be, right? And then his coach gets COVID, can't go with him. Like, and not just his coach, like I say his coach, but if you follow Brian Ortega's story, that's not just his coach, it's his mentor. It's this guy that father almost, right? Like, yeah, like you don't want to say that, put words in their mouth, but essentially it is, right? And I was thinking like, oh my God, no, like this poor guy, how's he going to do? And then he goes out and it looks like a whole new guy. It looks like
shaved his head. You're like, oh no.
Yeah, what's he doing? Yeah, this big surfer guy known by his hair, right? Comes out just shaved head, dead expression. You're like, oh boy, I was thinking the same thing. This is going to go one or two ways, and then you see him move, and it's like, he's never had footwork like that. He's never had feints like this. Like, what's going on? Like almost the whole first round, just trying to understand what is going on. And he
what am I seeing right now?
Right, and then you just see him put on this absolute masterclass against one of the toughest guys in that division, Korean Zombie, like just absolute destroyer. And it almost looked like he was toying with him. Like it wasn't even like
not even close. Yeah.
Like he wasn't even breathing hard, just absolutely dismantled him every round till the bell. And so for me as a fan is, like after a fight like that, I cannot wait for the Ariel Helwani and the Luke Thomas to get a hold of it and find out how did this happen? Like, what did you do in those 2 years? Like, did you just, go into a time machine into like 2050 and just train for like 10 years and then come back? Cause that's what it looks like. And he said, well, I was training and I was getting this far and I was a dog and I just knew I had heart and I had this jiu-jitsu and that's what was getting me by. And then I lost and I realized this wasn't enough. So I got a boxing coach and I just went all in on boxing. I got a kickbox. I got a wrestling coach. I got, started doing jiu-jitsu in other places and he just absolutely maximized. He got a nutrition coach. He got all this stuff and just took himself from just a really tough guy with a really refined skill set in one area and made himself a full-blown athlete and treated himself like an athlete and
fully invested in himself.
Yeah. And you got to see the difference in that. And I feel like that is such an important lesson for so many fighters that are listening to that, to see like, that's the real, that's the high level of what you can do if you can get to that point. And I think that's not to say everybody can do that. Who has the money to go, go to the best boxing coach, the best nutrition, do all that. Like you need to be at a certain point to do that. But if you know that is a point you can reach and that's a point where you can get to,
that's the first goal.
Yeah.
Is to get to that point.
Yeah.
And then the goal after that is the world championship or whatever.
And to do all that. And I'm curious for a guy like you, when you see a guy like Brian Ortega go into that and really invest in himself, you clearly can't do all those things. You just, you'd have to be, being bankrolled by some pretty big people if you wanted to invest in all that at this point. But how do you decide, okay, how do you for yourself decide, like, how important is the nutrition aspect? How important is it the real elite coaches in these certain domains? Like, how do you're still investing in yourself very clearly, right? You want to be the best you can, but you have to do that almost on a different scale. And really, which parts can I do and which parts can't I do? And which parts do I know I need to do, but I just can't afford it yet. And maybe, in a couple of years, that's when I'll invest in this. Like, how do you balance that?
I just kind of fly by the seat of my pants. Kind of thing.
Yeah. Rely on your coaches too.
Just, I rely on the coaches for, just more the technical, the fighting aspect side. My coach his whole career never had to cut weight.
Really?
Right. So he has kind of no idea. He has an idea.
Right. Being around the sport,
really technical or this at this time and stuff. So it was always kind of figuring it out for myself.
Right.
And then the balance, of strength and condition. Yeah. And then my time at the fight gym. So it's something I'm still playing with, and definitely could use a little more guidance on. So I'm looking for it.
And it's one of those areas where you'll never, it's just like everything else. You'll never be fully realizing that. You'll only keep getting better in it. Right. And you'll get your weight cuts better, and you'll get your nutrition better, and you're always going to be working on that. And you're going to be picking up little tips here and there, and you're always getting better. That's another big piece of why we say, if you don't evolve with the sport, you won't be there, because everybody else is getting better just as much as you're picking up on those. Everybody else is also doing those same things and trying to get that 1% better all the time. That's another area I'm curious to ask about, is the weight cutting, because that's something as a fan from the outside, no experience, and I just get to watch what they go through with that. And I'm always curious, like how do you learn those things? Because so many guys you see come through wrestling where they're used to weight cutting, they've been weight cutting their whole time. But if you see somebody come up from almost any other specialty, you don't really see that weight cutting be that big of an aspect. And now with MMA, it's just as big of an aspect as it is in wrestling. So now these wrestlers come in with a huge advantage. Like, is there a lot of stuff online? Is it just
little antics too when DC put the hand on?
Oh yeah, you see that all the time. Little
cheats,
bit. And where do you learn that? Wrestling, right? Exactly. You know exactly the little tricks, putting a little weight on the towel and stuff. Sure. And it's so funny now to see DC talk about that now that he's out of the sport and stuff. Oh, man, he is such a beauty. Yeah. Oh, I fucking love that guy. Yeah. And that's the thing. I was such a John Jones heart. I still am. I love fucking John Jones, but it blinded me so much to what a beauty DC was for so long. Yeah. That until that rivalry, I mean, it didn't conclude, but it became pretty obvious that they were kind of going on different paths, and it allowed me to really fully let DC into my life and let me fully enjoy him. And he's such a good dude. Like, I just love listening to him. And now just to have him in the sport as a great commentator and a great, podcaster, and just a great, right? His show detail, he's great, so good at it. Yeah. But I'm just curious, like, was that something that for the weight cutting specifically, is that something that you like went online and just tried to figure out kind of what to do, or just asked all the guys around and kind of got tips here and there and tried it out? Or
no, it's pretty easy to lose weight. You just kind of, restrict calories.
Right.
Again, going back to my man Shale, calories in versus calories out. Yeah. What am I burning? What am I taking in?
Right. So you try and lose the weight building up to it, so you don't have to do a big water cut. That's more your style.
I've done a water cut once or twice. My first 2 fights, and I didn't like it. Yeah. That just,
you don't feel good going in.
Unnecessary to me.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I try to stay within a 15-pound of what I fight, and then once that fight gets signed, strict diet. Yeah. And that's it.
Make it happen. That's good. And I feel like that is what I hope to hear, right? Like, and to each his own, everybody's going to do things differently, but just again, from a fan perspective of just my love of all these fighters, I want everybody to do well, and I want them to do good. When you see something that is on the whole negatively impacting the fighters, and we know that, I think anybody that's around the sport knows that, but the counter to it is, well, what's better? What can we do? Right? There's no other better alternative. I mean, you could look at
One FC,
right?
They do their hydration tests, and you can only gain back 10% of your body weight or something. There's
there's a couple small changes to really make the weight cutting process more manageable. And they moved everybody up a weight class.
Which doesn't change anything.
Exactly. So
right?
now, and just to explain people that might be a little bit more casual, I just want to get, so if we just look at the UFC and you look at the weight divisions, we'll just start with the 155 division. Mm-hmm. Those guys that are walking into the cage that have weighed in at 155 the day before, they are not walking into that cage at 155 to fight, unless you're Frankie Edgar, who's probably one of the only guys that we've seen in the last 10 years that does this, that just fights at his weight, right? Yeah. Or like everybody saw Israel Adesanya do the other day when he moved up to light heavyweight and was below the limit. Yeah. But what you're seeing is these guys will, for the most part, some guys do it just like Andrew said, of, being really good with their calories, losing the weight leading up to it. But what a lot of guys want to do is they want to carry that size in, so they drink a whole bunch of water with no minerals in it, distilled water, and just drink. They get their body so used to flushing a bunch of water. I think you drink regular water first, a whole bunch leading up to it, so your body gets used to like peeing all the time and really getting it out. Then you bring in the distilled water, so you're just peeing out all your minerals, all your stuff, and you're just dehydrating yourself down. And then when you get really close to the weight cut, you don't drink anything. And you go in sauna and you do all this stuff, and you really just dehydrate your body so that you can get as light as you can with the maximum amount to rehydrate and build back up before you step in that cage, so that you can carry that weight in. But what that does is CTE and brain injury is one of the biggest things that are around the sport, and that every fighter knows, and I'm sure you've thought about it, and you understand the risks that you're putting yourself through, and I think everybody has to have a conversation. But one of the biggest impacting factors for how much your brain can take is hydration, and how much fluid is around your brain to protect it. And the fact that they know that, and that we still can't find a solution like ONE FC is one of those things. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about water cutting. So then what this other company ONE FC did is they added in, so now if you're a 155 fighter, they would just pretty much move you up to 170, right? And now you're walking into the cage to fight at 170 anyways. Everybody's just cutting all that water weight and being unhealthy to make it happen. But if you choose not to, and you just walk in, you're 155, and you walk in at 155, you're now fighting a guy at 170, and you're at this huge disadvantage. So just the fact that it's been done for so long, you have to do it or you're going to get blown out. It's just such a part of the sport that unless you force it on everybody, that's why ONE FC just took all these guys from 155, moved them up to 170. And now you have to make 170, but you also have to be hydration tested to make sure that you're not completely dehydrated while you're doing that. And then, like you said, you can only gain back 10% of your body weight. So if you go in at,
so if you weigh in at 170, you can only gain back 17 pounds.
17 pounds, right? So if you try and walk in right before the fight and you weigh 188, they won't let you fight, right? Because you'll see,
be fined,
or you'll be fined, or you'll lose a piece of your purse to the other guy and stuff. But the main thing they're trying to say is we recognize the unsafe aspect of water weight cutting, and we're trying to do whatever we can to make it still fair.
Yeah, for me, it's not more about the unhealthiness. Fighter's going to fight, right?
Yeah. And you're taking risk. Yeah.
It's more like the fairness. Like, what kind of pussy are you that you were almost 200 pounds and you have the body that can cut weight? You want to fight at 55.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a guy who fights at 55. I'll maybe walk in the cage like 165.
Yeah.
Now I got to fight a guy who's 40 pounds heavier than me.
That's
like,
true.
Well, what the hell, man?
That's true. And then
their pussy, go fight guys your size.
And their counter argument probably is, well, what are you, pussy? You don't want to sit in that sauna and do that shit, right? Like, and I can kind of see it, but I'm way more on your side of if we can make it fair, and as long as you're fighting the same size guys, right? But I feel like that's also these guys that come in with a huge background of wrestling, and they can have that huge advantage because they've
done it their whole life.
They've done it since they're 6 years old. They've been perfecting this weight cut and this ability. Like you see a guy like Costa when he fought Adesanya, right? Like that, they're fighting at 185. He is walking in that cage. He's got to be 200 and
probably 220.
Probably 220, right?
Probably.
Like, and that is amazing. Yeah. Like the fact that they can do that, and the fact that he can make 185 is amazing, and the fact that he can rehydrate to that size. Like there's so many times you see that, but now you're right. Like why? It almost just makes it more confusing for the fans to understand of like, oh, the 155 weight division, they look at these monsters, right? Like you see, I'm trying to think of two of the biggest 155ers that going in
Poirier.
there.
I guarantee you Poirier's probably around 190, 195.
For sure.
100%.
Like, when you see Dustin Poirier walking, and the biggest time you saw it was when you saw Max Holloway come up from 45, and he's one of the biggest 45ers in the division, right? He's huge for 45 because he's coming in there. He probably, when he steps in that cage, he's probably closer to 170 than he is 145. But then you see him as one of the biggest, hugest featherweights step up to fight Dustin Poirier. He's one of the biggest And it looked like a dad beating up his kid. You know, I mean, you can't say about Max Holloway, one of the greatest of all time.
It looked like two different weight classes.
It looked like two different weight classes.
There's no way.
And you can see it when, even actually when you look at the last McGregor fight, like Poirier is a big dude. Like at 155, like, and it almost just makes it confusing because now if I'm a fan that's trying to understand the weight classes, like if you look at ONE FC, you're getting much more what is being told to you is matching what you're seeing, right? Yeah. And I agree with you with all that stuff, but I just, for me, a big part of this is probably trying to assuage my own guilt about the sport and what like I get so much entertainment and so much value out of the sport, but I know what the fighters are being put through. And I feel like I have guilt there of like, oh, am I selfishly enjoying the sport that they're sacrificing? And I understand now as I've gotten into the sport and that they understand the risks they're taking and they know what they're doing and they've done everything in their power to mitigate those risks, but they understand at the end of the day,
I'm in a cage fight.
I'm in a cage fight, right? And I understand that. And I just think that since they're doing all of that, it's just one area where, like you say, the difference between ONE FC and the UFC with how they're doing it, you're still fighting the same size guys, right? Like once you step in that cage and all that stuff goes away, it's almost identical, like the 155 and the 170 division in the two. But now it's way healthier, right? That's just, I agree that that's not the main aspect, but the fact that can be just a side aspect to it as well, that doesn't.
It's not such a detriment to you.
Yeah. I just feel like it's a no-brainer to me. That's what gets me so fired up about it. It almost pisses me off that it's so obvious that this is a change you could make that would be for the better for all these fighters. And the fact that they don't, and I shouldn't say that nothing is easy, that, you know, you have history and all this stuff. But.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is, so back to the fluid in your brain and stuff. Yeah. It takes, I think I read or someone, a fighter was talking about this. It takes about 36 hours for ingestion of liquid. Yeah. To fully rehydrate your brain, right? And before USADA, before all this strict drug testing, you were allowed to use IVs to rehydrate,
right? Which
only takes 24, right?
Yeah, you're right. That was a big change.
So you could fully rehydrate with an IV way quicker and actually have that fluid in your brain. Yeah. And then they banned IVs because of the plastics, right, that come through.
Yeah, they were saying that there's certain steroids and performance enhancers that are done by IVs that they can't detect, but what they can detect is the plastics in the IV bag that go in that say, oh, you were taking an IV, right? Yep. So now they just banned IVs altogether, which guys used to wake up that they're just putting fluids and not putting any steroids in with them, but now they detect those plastics and now they don't know, were you just using an IV for rehydrating or were you using an IV for steroids? So they just cut it out altogether. But that was a huge impact on what guys had to move up weight classes. They couldn't physically make their body rehydrate fast enough with the drastic weight cuts that they're doing, right? Like it changed the game overnight. That one rule change, right?
One little suspension. Yeah.
So what, as a fighter, what were your thoughts on that specific one? Do you think if that is truly what they were citing as the reason why they did it was to cut out that one risk of steroids getting through, do you think that's worth it for what they gave the fighters to be able to rehydrate with IVs?
I would rather everybody move up a weight class.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. As a fan, I think that would make
I don't want steroids
sense
in my sport. Get the fuck out, you weak ass bitches. Like, what are you taking shit for? TJ, fuck you. You know?
Yeah, no shit. And
come on, man.
And that's exactly.
I get you guys want to be the best, but
and
can't cheat, man.
Yeah, and that's so tough too, especially what I'm finding is now you love this sport and you love these guys and you get so behind it. Like TJ was.
Oh man, I was a big fan. Man.
Oh, and I still am, and I have, anymore. I know, and I totally get that, right? Like, because there's been other situations where guys have done that and I've completely flip flopped on it, and I'm not a fan anymore. And just the fact that it was EPO too, like one of the worst ones you can do, right? And it was like, I don't know, I just. Yeah, but what I'm getting at is that when that news came out that he got popped for EPO and is one of your favorite fighters and you're so diehard and I'm all around town telling everybody watch this fight. This is my favorite fighter. You got to watch this guy. And that happens, like, fuck. I feel like an idiot too because now I've been shouting from the rooftops about TJ Dillon.
The best ever.
Yeah, like fuck, he is unstoppable. Like look at him. And then now every fight, those battles with Cody, right? Like it calls into question everything, right? Like how do I know that you weren't doing it? And there's rumors of him doing it earlier. Like That's tough for me.
Cody was
one of the ones saying, yeah, he was calling him.
Yeah, they were promoting the fight. He was like, man, you taught me how to do all this shit.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like,
yeah.
But it's so tough now too to see that, because before, like in any other sport, even if it was somebody on my own team, right? Like if my favorite NFL team has a player that pops, right? I'm not really that personally invested in it. And I assume in those other sports, everybody's on that shit, right? Like, and they just don't have the testing that MMA does.
But certain sports, yeah. Baseball, I want them to be juiced out.
For sure.
Fucking knock that thing out of the arena. I don't care.
Same. And
tennis, all this shit.
And so do the sports. The NFL wants them to be drug. That's why they have the worst drug testing in the world. They know, every player knows when they're coming to drug test, right? And it's put in.
You got to be a moron to fail those.
You have to be a moron to fail those tests in the NFL. Where at the UFC, not the same. You saw the testing where you have to be telling them where you are at every moment of every day.
They show up.
They show up whenever they want, all the time. Blood and urine tests, right? Like, that is hard. If you're going to cheat,
it's a little too much. I understand what they're doing.
I agree with you. Yeah,
it's a little invasion of rights, I think. But
me too.
But I get it.
But where I'm
down.
Yeah, no,
Sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you that I think there's a more middle ground that they can find. But the biggest thing that highlights to me is exactly, I think, is what you were going to say earlier, and I kind of cut you off a little bit. Is the difference is that the NFL. Okay, MFL is a bad example. MLB, they want their guys to be juiced up. Nobody's getting hurt, right? Like, unless you get a comebacker off the ball and it hits a pitcher, like one in every 6,000 games, that might be a risk. But there's not that big a risk, right? So the MLB profits by having more exciting, better athletes. MMA also would profit from having guys juiced out of the gills. It'd be more exciting. But now there's a downside of, you are inflicting damage on that person. If you take steroids and now you inflict more damage than you could have naturally, that brings in so many other questions. So now it shows the actual intent of it, right? Like, I feel like in almost every other sport but fighting, drug testing is more, it's just to say that it's clean, because there's people that value fairness, right? It's all lip service. Whereas fighting, it's not. Right. And I think there's certain leagues you can go into. Anybody can probably name some leagues in the past where
God bless.
Right?
My favorite fights of all, Pride FC, man.
Exactly. And it said right in the contracts, we do not test for steroids, right? And there'd be guys that come in there, fight 155, and like, oh yeah, we want you to fight 170. Well, oh no, we'll get you up to 170, right? Like, we will make sure you're there. And they were very upfront about it.
You knew what you were getting into.
Exactly. And I'm fine with that. Right. And I do agree. So now the question to me is, I agree with what they're going for and bringing in USADA, and like we talked about, that really step in over their rights and the invasion, they give up everything, right? Which I would always also be fine with. Here's my piece on it. And this isn't my piece. I shouldn't say this is straight out of Luke Thomas's mouth. I'm just parroting it. Yeah. Is that would be fine, this invasion of privacy, if there was some sort of fighters union where they got a say in this. They didn't pull all the fighters on the UFC roster and say, hey, do you want to give up your rights to clean up the sport and stuff? And I feel like if they did, I'm sure a lot of guys would say like you, like, hey, I think that's a bit of an overstep, but if that's what's going to do it, and everybody's on playing the same playing field, we all have to do it. I'm down
to start.
Yeah, to start and clean it up, and then maybe we can back off and find a nicer play. But it wasn't. It was unilaterally put down through. See, this is what we're bringing in, and now it's a whole different discussion, right? Like of waking guys up in bed when they're right in a fight camp, at 6 a.m. and
man, I got 3 more hours of sleep. You just ruined that.
Yeah, and I'm an athlete. I am min maxing all these things. I have my whole training for this day is set up on what kind of sleep I can get the night before and all this stuff, right? Like there is a better middle ground, but to me, that's almost the secondary issue. To me, the bigger issue is that should be up to the fighters, right? The fighters should have some sort of say in that. And that is,
or say you broke your phone and you didn't have time to check in with USADA and then you get flagged. You're like, I didn't miss it, man.
Yeah, exactly.
I just didn't have time to let you know where I was.
Or you're going on a fishing trip and you just forget that day to update with USADA that you're going to be on, and now you get flagged or you get suspended, right? Because if you miss protocol where you saying where you are, I can't remember what they call it, like
I think if you miss 2 or 3,
you can get like I've seen just a guy a 6-month suspension for just missing his not being up to date on his notifications of where he's at. Like that is it's
a little too much.
A little bit too much, right?
Fascist, but
a little bit. Hey, it kind of falls over the line into a little bit the more dangerous territory there. But again, I would be so much more fine with that if they had any sort of say, right? And it's just one of those things where, but you recognize that they can't have say because of the way that it's set up. The way the UFC has it structured, where the fighters are not employees, they are contractors. They are just set up like we just set the rules. If you want to come fight for us, you can. This is
how we do it here.
This is how we do it here. take it or leave it, right? We're the pinnacle. If you want to go fight for Bellator, you can do that, right? Or ONE FC, or there's some other ones. And that is, the UFC is so smart. That's the other part of this too, is I love the fighters so much, but I love the sport, and I love Dana White too.
Oh yeah, man, he's a savage.
I love how he ordered, and so much of this is like everyone. I feel like a lot of times the journalists in the sport get on Dana White because he's making business moves too, right? And they're so pro fighter and want the best for the fighters, which is great. And if you're that intensely linked and you're talking to fighters week after week, that's obviously naturally where you're going to go. But I find for myself that's separated out, and I'm a businessman too, right? Like I have a business degree. I love business. My dad was a businessman since I was a little kid, and I got to watch it, and that was, a very high value. So I get to watch a sport and have almost two selves. I get to watch all these rules and these reasons, and USADA getting brought in. I think like, I would love for the fighters to have a say, but I also understand that the benefit that the UFC gets by not having the fighters have a say allows them to make money and have power and
buy an island and put on shows through a pandemic. Yeah,
what it gives them, and I feel like that's where I'm looking for the evolution of the journalism in the sport, because it seems like all the journalists, and I feel like to be a journalist, you almost have to be pro fighter, because how are you're going to lose access if you take the side of the company. And I think you see it with some of the real company men like Brett Okamoto and stuff, where
he doesn't get the full interviews.
He will get the interview. Like, he is the UFC's guy, whereas Ariel Helwani is.
He's not even allowed.
Persona non grata. Yeah, like Dana White fucking hates him, right? Yeah. But he's my favorite for that reason, because he doesn't give a fuck. He's going to say that, and he's so pro fighter. But that's fine to me, because now I know what Ariel Helwani's take is going to be on most things. Yeah. It's going to be the pro fighter take. Sure. But to me, I'm not always the pro fighter. Sometimes I'm saying, you know what, you're in the wrong here, right? Like sometimes when guys hold out and are saying Dana White don't pay me more, like Henry Cejudo, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of on their side. Like, I think you probably should get paid more. I always want guys to get paid more in the abstract. I want everybody to get paid more. But for one specific guy versus any specific guys to say what my personal claim is, sometimes I side with the UFC, and I'm like, no, I'm kind of with them on this one. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's where I'm looking for it's going to be the next journalistic step of where they take, is now there's going to be guys that don't give a fuck and are willing to risk their access with the fighters to maybe take the other side at some time. But I feel like it's going to really engender people and fans and fighters alike to this guy of like, no, he just says his shit. Because I feel like everybody, but fighters especially, really value genuineness, right? And people that are going to stand by and not just say it because that's what I'm supposed to say. And I feel like that will be that next step. But it's kind of interesting. I feel like you don't get that, or which journalists are, like you say, which ones are going to take this side and this side without even almost really having to listen to them. And I feel like that's going to be the next step, is the guys that just say what they want and support the fighters when they think they're in the right, support the company when they think the company's in the right, and just kind of say what they mean.
Have a full understanding of fighter, and like, it's two different businesses. Mm-hmm. The fighter is his own business, and then the UFC is his own business. Yeah, that's why you're hired contractors.
Exactly, and that's where sometimes it blows my mind that when you see Dan Hooker and Sugar Sean O'Malley and these guys that are so good at promoting themselves and have their own podcast and are growing their own brand, and it's this fight because the UFC knows that there is real benefit to helping promote them, right? Like, I feel like if the next time Sugar Sean fights, if they did a promo for his podcast on that card, that would blow him up. And I feel like the type of fan that gets, if somebody, like I said, if you're listening to that guy week after week, an hour of him being genuinely himself, and you get to know his personality, right? Like, he's one of my favorite fighters for that reason. I love Sean O'Malley. Like, to that, I asked my girlfriend, I'm hyperventilating like the whole week before his fights, because I'm freaking out, right? Because I'm just so nervous for him, right? And all that stuff. But then there's that balance where now they can't do that, because they know that would bring more fighters and that would help elevate the sport. But now they're giving away their control. They want to keep you on your own island, where they love that people do that stuff, but not on our advertising dollars, right? Even though they would benefit too from it, they can't show themselves as helping out each and every fighter, because now that takes away from it. No, you're just contractors. We're not part of it, right? They have to keep that balance and
fully invest.
Exactly.
Unless you're Connor.
Yeah, unless you're Connor, right? You can see that happen where you can transcend that, because the sport is so young. There's ways that you can transcend it on your own.
Yeah, you just got to find your right avenue, right? Yeah, everybody tried to copy Connor.
Yeah, and you saw what happened.
Come on, guys. Yeah, be original, right? And first it was Chael.
Mm-hmm.
Chael was the first guy to do it
for sure.
Just with the antics and the talking and stuff. But yeah, find your own way.
Yeah,
you can't just copycat expect it to work. And
exactly. And when you copycat, like we said, the genuineness is what people are so on. So when you're copycatting, it's not truly you. We can see it from a mile, right? Like I mentioned Henry Cejudo earlier when he came in with all that cringe stuff, and that was a new lane. To give him props, nobody had done that before. He wasn't copycatting anyone because then nobody was crazy enough to try the shit where he was just the most cringy guy in interviews, but he kind of got half good at it. And by the end of it, I was kind of like, okay, I get what you're doing. Or maybe I shouldn't say it. It was kind of Colby Covington maybe was the first one to do it. It was just a complete troll, like heel, but it was in a different way. Like Henry Cejudo did it in his own way. But now where I want to bring this is now you see Aljamain Sterling. After that DQ, he is lean. He's went full Henry Cejudo these last couple of weeks, and it is awful. It's so disingenuous because I've followed Aljamain Sterling for like 5 or 6 years now. I know who you are. Aljo, I love Aljo. This isn't Aljo. This is him trying to be Henry Cejudo, and it's just awful, right? Yeah. And it's not good. And I think he's losing fans with it. And I feel like it's so sad for me because it's like, no, you're an awesome guy. You have an amazing story. Like talking about you not having a bed for like 3 years and just staying in this little apartment above the gym in New York or in New Jersey or wherever it is at Ray Longo's there. Like that is an amazing story. You don't need to take on these antics and be this person.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Right. So if it is working, he's losing fans, right?
And that's me guessing. I'm just putting it in my. I don't know if maybe he's growing like a rocket ship right now. I don't know.
But what's going to happen is eventually people are going to tune in to watch him lose.
Right.
So as long as people are still watching you. Right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. And look at Floyd Mayweather, right? Like he capitalized that on that for, probably the back half of his career was all people just tuning in to see him lose.
Well, that was very intriguing. See if that was gonna
and him flashing all his money in his cars and like being in the club till 2, not drinking, then running home from the club to stay his train. Like just the story and the mystique that he built up was amazing, right? Like that is a very important lesson is people tuning in to watch you win or watch you lose as long as they're tuning in, right? Like that's what you hear people say. And I feel like that's where I would say almost Colby Covington, that's where I would highlight of that, like in the difference between Aljo and that, like I feel like Colby Covington does that where he
just watched a lot of pro wrestling.
Yeah. Exactly. He took that wrestling model, but to me, at least that's interesting. Like I want to listen to his interview. Oh, Colby Covington's doing an interview. I know what it's going to be, and I'm going to listen to it just to laugh at it, right? Whereas Henry Cejudo at the start, I think later on, it grew on me a little bit, and I stopped getting this way. But it was just I'm just turning it off. Every time you come out, I just turn it on, and that's what it is with Aljo. I have to skip it. It's too cringy just to watch that. I'm turning it right off. So now it's not like Colby Covington where he's pulling me in, where I want to see this antics. I want to. It's on the other side. With Aljo the last couple weeks, I can't even watch it. And it hurts me. It's like, oh, I know who you are. Like, and I want you to get back to.
He's a good fighter.
Like, he's a great fighter. He's amazing, right? And I'm so excited for that. And, won't be seeing him for another 9 months.
Also don't think he needs a rematch. Like,
no, I think he should go fight someone else. Yeah. I think the winner of Sanahagen and Dillashaw should fight him interim or whatever you want to do or strip him.
Needs to be a little more punished. Like, you knew what you're doing, man.
Yeah, that was, and that's the thing. Like,
you were the champ and you got disqualified. Yeah, you get knocked down a couple rungs. Work your way back up.
And he's so good. It doesn't matter who he fights. I can't think of a fighter at 135 that I would put a favorite over him. Right? Like, maybe going
he'll
into
be champ again.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And he will. But
you don't get an immediate rematch.
Exactly. And I'm fine with that too. For me, I'm fine giving him the immediate rematch if it's Aljo. Right? Oh yeah. If Aljo has to get neck surgery and all this stuff, so he's going to be out, and that changes the dynamic. But if he was fine and you could get that fight reset, I also don't like that the championship changes on a DQ. I feel like that should be a no contest, and you line up the rematch if you can. But then you have a situation like this where that doesn't work. Right now the belt's just vacant. But I don't know. It's almost that thing where the sport's so young, you don't know what the best way to do this. We're kind of going with what's happened so far, but I don't know if this is the best.
We've never seen a championship change hands by a DQ.
Exactly, until that happened.
Yeah,
right?
It's interesting.
And it was funny. I was watching that fight with a couple people, and he almost. And again, I'm just trying to pull this from memory, but it almost seemed like he was going to go for a knee that was clearly legal, and the ref warned like, "Hey, no, he's grounded, right?"
Threw it anyways.
And then he throws a few more punches, and then he throws the knee again, and
there was intent,
right? There was intent, right? But what I knew as a fan, because I'm so into this stuff, I knew what was going to happen, right? Because I remembered from when Anthony Smith was put in that exact same situation when John Jones kneed him when he was down, and it was a hard knee too, right? And he took it, and he recognized in that moment that it was up to him. He could take that DQ and become the champ, or he could say he could keep fighting, right? Yeah. Face adversity and all this stuff. But now so I remembered all that. So as soon as he threw that knee, I said, oh no. Like, and all my thoughts were, and it was Mark Smith was the ref, if I remember correctly. And I was thinking, oh man, they're going to put Aljo. I hope they don't put Aljo in this position where they make him, because I felt that was when that happened with Anthony Smith. I just felt so bad. How are you going to make a fighter in the middle of all this make that big of a decision, right? Like, you were going to be remembered, right? And Anthony Smith in that moment made that decision where he was getting brutalized. There's no way he's winning that fight, but he didn't want to be known as that guy that won the belt that way.
Right.
And he made that risk in that moment. But how a fighter's got so much to worry about in that moment. How are you adding that on? How is there ever a situation where that is up to them? But then how can you ask anybody else if they can continue? There's only one guy that can say it. But I just felt like, and I love Mark Smith. He's probably my second favorite ref, maybe third, but I felt like he didn't do a very good job in that situation. I feel like there were certain things he could have done that he it sounded like he did not want to have anything to do with it. And he was just trying to just force it onto Aljo. Wasn't, making the call that he can't continue. And I felt so bad for Aljo in that moment. I just wish there was some better way they could handle it.
So kind of like on the same line of thinking there, the pressure from the fighter that they feel is the reaction they're going to get from the fans.
Exactly.
Right. When John Jones won the title against Shogun, just beating the brakes off him.
Yeah.
Right. Shogun was just taking a beating, and people respected that more than when they said you want to tap to strikes. Like, they don't like seeing people tap to strikes,
right?
Which is insane.
GSP just the other day was talking about when he tapped to strikes, right? Like
that's there,
yeah. Like that. There's no, and I feel like
more honor, I guess, dying on your shield.
I guess, yeah. And
so,
but I feel like
that's what Anthony Smith versus Aljo
for sure.
He's like, I guess I'll die on my shield.
Exactly.
I have no choice.
Exactly. And I feel like, and you got to see the reaction. The fans loved, I feel like that was the moment that cemented Anthony Smith's legacy. It was like him in that firefight, knowing that and to make that decision. That was so, it almost gives me goosebumps. You can see it to even just think about, to be put in that moment. I just hate that he was put into that moment. I wish that the rule was, if that happens, it is.
Where's his career now?
I know, right? And you think,
champ.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's the thing. And now the only difference is the perception, right?
Yeah.
Like, Aljo's one of the most hated guys in the sport right now. I mean, you can't say that. Everybody loves him, right? And this is the thing that I want to get to is I feel like the guys like myself that are into the sport this much and are maybe more of the hardcore. I don't even want to consider myself a hardcore because I don't train or anything. I just really love the sport. But
you don't have to be a hardcore fan,
right?
You don't have to train to be a hardcore fan as well.
But I feel like it's the people that are the ones that are going to be mad at Aljo or mad at Anthony Smith are the ones that are casual. I feel like it's the people that. Almost the ones that are the loudest about those kind of things aren't the people that you should really be listening to, because to me, regardless of the decision that was made, I understand that. And I'm not going to, I had no fault for Aljo. When he made that decision, because that knee was hard. And I felt the same way with Anthony Smith. I feel like what I said to my girlfriend in that moment, I said, if this was me, which is the dumbest thing you can say, because what the fuck do I know? I have no idea what it's like to be in there. But I was just saying, like, I wish what I could do is to say, yes, I can keep fighting and then have my towel throw the corner, or have my corner throw the towel, so that I could lose, because I wouldn't want to win that way. But I would, but clearly,
I don't want to keep fighting.
But he can't keep fighting, and he took a really bad knee, and that was the situation. It was like, oh, clear, and you could see Aljo, because he didn't want to answer, because he's trying to think, like, he's trying to clear his head, and he's saying, like, no, I took a bad knee, like, I don't want to keep fighting, and obviously I'm losing before, right? Like,
I like what you said. That's an interesting thought. It's never come across my mind like that. But backpacking on that a little bit. I don't like that they separate the fighter from the corner in those moments.
Right.
You should be able to go have a discussion and game plan a little bit. And then that would have sufficed
to say something like that, right? Like, I wish there was something where there was more options. So, because that situation where both Anthony Smith and Aljo got put into is terrible. There's no good way. You take the DQ, you win the belt like that, you're going to have the fans on you. You say you can keep fighting when you're clearly compromised and you damage yourself for life. That's not a good outcome either. So now, just on the way the rules are centered, you are, once again, because now no rules change, that's going to happen again now. And that situation that we've seen now twice, a fighter be put in, that's clearly no win for them, is going to happen again. That's where I don't like it. That's where I feel like somehow we need to come up with a set thing of, if this happens, it's not on the fighter to make this decision where they're fucked either way. Because why, like, if I'm a fighter, that sucks that is ever an opportunity that could come up. And now every fighter after Anthony Smith, that's why this was so significant, because when it happened with Anthony Smith, I didn't know if Anthony Smith knew the rules enough. And people listening probably think like, how does a fighter not know the rules? With MMA, the rules are different in different places. It's very hard. It's very common for guys to not even be aware of what that specific rule set in that area is. Yeah. So that's not that uncommon. But when it was Anthony Smith, I didn't know if he knew whether if he said continue or not, if he knew that if he said, no, I can't, that he'd win the belt or not. But when Aljo happened, I knew. He knows, because this happened with Anthony Smith. Now, that's a different situation, right? And you could see it going through his head, and like I feel like, and watching that, and I feel like I need to caveat what I said earlier about Aljamain. In that moment when he did that, I felt so bad for him when he was holding the belt off. I was like, my heart paying for him, because I could tell he took a hard knee and he couldn't continue that. I don't think he was faking it. People calling him an actor, I think that's bullshit.
Well, the thing is, when you're down like that, all you're expecting is punches.
Right.
Right. So I'm not saying your guard's totally down, but you're watching the hands, nothing's coming, and then his knee hits you out of nowhere.
Exactly. And what do they say? All these fighters go, it's not about the strength of the punch that you eat. It's about not seeing it.
Yeah.
There's so much different. You can eat the same punch 20 times and be fine. And then just on that one thing where you didn't see it and it clips you in your ear, there's a certain mechanism of you clenching your body and being prepared to take a hit that is so much different than not getting hit. Same with getting hit in the back. It's about not seeing what's coming at you. And you're so right. When you're trained in that moment, he doesn't know. And that's a hard, and a knee to the ground opponent is one of the most damaging, it's one of the most useful or the most effective strikes in fighting, right? That's why they take it out of so many. And we got to see with DJ the other day when he lost his belt too, right? That is one of those strikes where it is so game changing, right? And the same with the Anthony Smith one, like that knee that John Jones had. I mean, a little bit different. It wasn't like the Aljo situation where he just got a warning 3 seconds early. He's down, don't knee him, right? Throws a few more and then knees him, right? Like that is I don't want to compare the two, but where I was getting with the Aljo thing was I was so on Aljo's side, and I agree, and I thought he made the right choice. What I was mad at was that he had to make that choice, and he was fucked either way. Yeah. But I was glad he made that choice, because I would so much rather the fans be a little bit pissed at you and you to be healthy and to fight another day. Like I said, I've followed Aljo for years. I don't want him to be hurt. Yeah. What I didn't like was all his antics after the fact. Now that he's gone full cringe and he's, full heel, went full heel on it, and not even in a fun way where we're in on it. It's cringy, right? And also just the way he celebrated that night too. Like I just feel like he just handled it all wrong from that point. But I have no qualms with what he did in that occasion, the decision he made. I think there was no good decision to be made. And I feel like my issue is more with the rule set that puts people into that situation. And again, even to back that off, another step is I don't even have that much qualms with the rules, because we're just figuring this stuff out. There's so many rules there's so many, the judging needs to be overhauled. All this stuff needs to be overhauled, and we're just not there yet. We're asking for things. We're just impatient with those things.
I just don't know why it's not there yet. Like,
yeah, the judging thing.
Yeah.
That one
only in Vegas.
Yeah, but
I think the judging so far on Fight Island, I might be wrong, has been
better,
much better.
But still, to me, I have an idea and I want to run it by you, because this is my thing. I feel like so much of what I'm seeing lately is we're stuck with things because that's the way we've always done them, and there's precedent, and there's tradition, there's history. And then the internet comes in, right? Like radio shows and TV shows, right? And then you see in the last 5-6 years with podcasts and all this stuff, people just coming in and doing themselves and giving the choice. It's so much better. What I want to see is that you take certain guys that, you have MMAjudging.com, and these guys sign up, and every week, and they have their name and their information about it, and they're accountable, and they have to, talk about why they did it afterwards. So it's already a step up. Accountability is added in, right? And I think you could do this. I'll just lay out the full idea, because I think this isn't something that would take place, but I think it would force accountability for now them to change their system. But now you can have as many people as you want, and then week after week they're judging, and then you have people vote on how accurate they think those judges are. And now those judges are going to naturally find themselves out, and the ones are going to go to the top. Now, either I see a bunch of things that could do. Either now that is a feeder system for all these athletic commissions now to pull for judges that have a clear set of, this is my history of judging fights real time. And obviously it's different because it's not in person. Yeah. And I also think that could be a big thing of why not have 2-3 judges in person and 2 judges watching from a scorecard or from a separate room, so you can see it, because so much you see on camera, you can tell that a punch didn't connect or it got him on the clavicle or something. And you see the guy go, oh, you know, Joe Rogan goes nuts. It's hard to tell when you're at cage side. You can't tell those things where you can tell almost better. But there's certain things you get from being in person. The impact of punches, right? Like the sound, the effect, you can get so much more. And I feel like you almost need both to if you want to judge it as accurate as possible, you almost need both. But also, why 3 judges? Like, is that just a cost thing? Like, you don't want to hire more, or what? Why can't you have 5 judges? Why can't you add things in? And then also,
it's very boxing.
It is very boxing, but that's what I'm saying. It's just the only reason we're doing these things is because we're stuck in tradition, right? And the only reason that we haven't tried new things is because this is the way we've always done it. And you're always working on, you know, the UFC has so many things on their plate to work on that's just not one of the things, and it's out of their control.
I don't know how you get a job as a judge. I don't know what kind of schooling or like it's all government based, right? Yeah. So it's really interesting because the only way to, I think the easiest way to solve it, and it might even be cheaper than hiring the judges that the UFC does, is ex-fighters.
Ex-fighters. That's
they know what's going on.
And that's where I see that aspect of doing some sort of online thing where ex-fighters can do that, and then they'll rise to the top. And those ones, and now, even if it was just a picking pool from that of a feeder league for them to now get some good ex-fighters into there, where it's not these guys coming out. Because my understanding is that still probably a good 80-90% of these judges are boxing judges that have converted over and taken a course or whatever to understand ground game. But as anybody that knows the sport even a little bit, if you think you can understand the ground game in its full, the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu game and ground striking, ground and pound, all those things in a course or in a year or into it, you need to be almost training in it for like 5-6 years to really understand the full. Like, I don't understand it all. Like, I feel like
me neither. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even a fighter doesn't understand all the aspects of it. And then we understand, and then we get so up in arms when we see, these judging results that very clearly show that the judges aren't understanding the ground game, right? Like, I think we just saw some, I think last weekend, where there was some real domination on the ground, and then, but in the stand-up they did well, and they gave them the fight. And it was like, just even the judge, it was the Bellator card on Friday last weekend that I was watching, and they were just seeing this, and the commentators, right? Big John McCarthy, now that he's not reffing, he's commentating. Him and Morrow were just giving it to these judges, right, the whole night, which I love. I love when they're honest about this. They're just calling them out. Yeah, and they're just saying like, that was one of the worst decisions we ever heard. That might take it for the worst one. So then all night they're just saying like, all right, we're fairly certain this guy won, but we have no idea. And then it would be a split decision. They're like, holy shit, and they're just like, like this needs to change, and just give it to him. I think that is the only tool we have in our kind of pocket to help change this, is that hopefully people still do that and they have the freedom, and the organizations like the UFC and the Bellator leave that freedom, which I think they like it too, to give them, because it's not like
Dana hates the fucking judges too.
Exactly. It's not the UFC. It's not the UFC that's hiring these judges. And that's where my head starts turning is now, how do we change that? Like, how do we take it out? Like, clearly over the last 10 years, or you give these, athletic commissions a date. You say, if you don't have this judging better in 2 years, we're gonna petition the government or whatever to be able to judge it. But you can't have your own organization judge your own fights, because now that's a conflict of interest. If the UFC can pick who they want, now that's going to get squirrely too. But this is why I like the idea of what I was thinking of when I was trying to flesh this idea out in my head, is now you have that ranking of like, you know, just everybody can do it, right? But then you take the top 100 or top 50, whatever, and you make certain, you could even get like 3 guys that always want to hop together and say like, this is Lloydminster MMA judging team of these 3 guys that are accountable and talk about after, and then they can start to do so. Then, you know, and I just know,
here's their credentials. Yeah. They do have a history of this stuff.
Exactly.
You know, and then have a background.
And then even if it's those guys on that night that are judging it, now you have these guys too. And eventually, if the hardcores like me that want to check these guys' score of how they score a fight too, if that becomes more salient and more well,
consistent.
Yeah, more consistent, but more valued than the judges then. Because now what happens is, okay, there's a bad decision, but that fighter says like, oh yeah, I'm in a loss with these shit judges. But when you look at the good judges that everyone values, no, I won that fight. And they start acting with that, because no sport is like this, where you can, even if you lose a fight, like one of the good examples, Jose Aldo, when he I think he lost a fight when he first went down to 135. There's a time where he either just won a fight, but it was kind of controversial, or he lost a fight that he should have won. And they still moved, like, technically he took that L on his record, but when you look at the actual reaction of what happened, they almost treated him as if he won, because it was pretty clear to everybody watching that he did win and he could kind of walk that back. I feel like what that would do is empower, because now it's not just, you know, you have the fighters that say like, oh, I believe I won that fight, right? Like that's just bullshit judging, but you don't really have much to stand on it. And it's kind of up to if the UFC sees it that way too, you might still benefit. You might still be able to,
they'll reward you somehow.
Yeah. It won't, that L won't affect your trajectory like it would have. Yeah. Right. But now I feel like if you start supporting those guys with, like, it's not just me saying it. Look at, you know, like, on whatever judging.com, 90% of the judges gave it to me. Right. And these guys are way better than them. Right now it starts to do it. And now the UFC can start taking that. And I feel like what that would do is add pressure on to them. And now if you can go back after the fight and see the judge throw his webcam on and just say like, hey, I gave it to him these rounds, this round, I really valued this, and give some background. Now that's going to force, it's competition, right? You see, the only reason that this judging has allowed to get to this point is because there's no competition. There's no other options. It's complete. And that is, again, just no accountability, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Accountability and competition are almost synonymous with each other, right? There's different ways where you're going to put those two things in, but they almost bring the same effect. And I feel like if there's some way we could bring some sort of competition to judging, even if it's not, you know, fighting to take their jobs, which I would hope it would. And I hope eventually these commissions would say like, oh, I need to hire
somebody better.
Yeah. There's somebody better that I can hire and pay.
You be better.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Exactly.
Or we're going to get somebody else. And I feel like right now there's just not very good avenues to make that a reality. I feel like if we could, we would see the judging turn around in a real hurry. Yep. But I think that disconnect where we say the UFC can just say, well, not our problem. You know, it's these fucking commissions, right? They just keep bringing us shit judges. What do you expect us to do? That's one of those things. And I can see that argument, and I'll give you that. Like, but for me as a fan, I just feel like there's things that we could do almost just that could be a fan run website that did it, right? As long as somebody knows half decent how to code, they can make that website today, and we could start this process and at least put a little bit of pressure from our little side of what we can do to help these fighters. Because, you know, like I talked about earlier, having a little bit of that guilt about how much enjoyment I get out of the sport versus the risks that they're taking in it. And I want to make sure I'm always fully balancing that, because I don't want to just take all this enjoyment and don't realize that. I'm always thinking of what little things can I do as a fan that would help these fighters, right? And I feel like that's being very vocal about fighter pay, about show and win bonuses and those kind of things, right? Like, sure, if the fans start calling for it, the UFC isn't going to change, right? The only way that the UFC is change is if their audience, their paying audience, is screaming and yelling for it, or if the fighters would unify. But it's or
so
if they
hard.
just stop watching.
That's
protest,
right? Protest, but you know. That's tough for me because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to give up. I don't want to give up my fights, right? But they know that. And I feel like that's where you got to be vocal about this thing, because they're not going to change it, right? These structures. And I think, and maybe just to explain to people that are listening that maybe don't know MMA as much, there's a lot of aspects about fighter pay in terms of the lower level guys and what they're getting paid. And there's an argument to be made there that we need to set some sort of lower bounds and help the guys that are just on the entry level contracts that are coming in. But then there's also a very tradition. This has been in fighting for a very long time. It's called show and win. Yep. So when you're coming in the UFC, you know, you a very normal contract. I'm sure you'll see there's a lot of fighters, you know, a 10 and 10. You make 10 grand to show up and make weight, right? And make the fight. If you enter that cage, lock the door, and the fight starts, you get that 10 grand. Now, the other half of your paycheck, the other 10 grand, is only if you win, right? And if you lose, you only make 10 grand for that fight. And the argument is that they want to get as much out of the fighters as they can, that if there's money tied to them winning, they're going to give it their all, more, I guess.
Incentive.
Yeah, more incentive. But that might have worked when this was kind of a backyard sport and you had people that weren't really fighters and this wasn't their whole dream.
This was karate versus wrestling.
Yeah, like, you know. But we surpassed that a decade ago.
100%.
When has there been a fighter that needed that other half of his paycheck as the incentive to go out there? You know, there is so much.
They made the UFC for a reason. They don't need incentive.
Exactly, right? Like we're so much far past that, and now it's just a way for them to pay less and for them to, you know, it makes the UFC more. And I say UFC, but all these Bellator, it makes organizations more profitable with this show and win structure that they have. Mm-hmm. But it's such bullshit for the fighters, right? And you see certain fighters of a certain caliber say, fuck that, I'm not doing that. No, you pay me what you pay me, right? But that's only if you get to the point where you have enough, pull to
enough say, enough draw, enough.
Exactly. And enough that you're bringing to the table that you can make those kinds of demands. But when the sport is this fast moving and this,
you're only as good as your last fight.
You're only as good as last fight. And then also too, you see guys like John Jones where he wants more and he sits out. If they're willing to let John Jones sit, who is anybody else?
I have a little different take on John Jones. I don't think he should be asking for what he's asking for.
$50 million a fight?
I'm not saying he's not worth it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying he cost the UFC a lot of money.
For sure. And I agree. And I feel like
the day before dropping out of one of the biggest pay-per-views ever.
For sure. For sure.
And then the UFC just having to scrap. So
and all the media they had to do.
You didn't play ball, the UFC's not going to play ball.
100%. I think yeah, you're right. John Jones is the wrong guy, and I completely agree with you. I think he's the wrong guy for us to all stand behind on this. I think he is right, and his argument is that I've been underpaid for all these fights. Look at what I've brought you guys over the years, right? And I could counter that with a couple more arguments on their side of how much PR did we have to spend when you hit that fucking pregnant lady and ran from the scene? Like, fuck, come on, John. Like,
how many chances have we given you?
How many chances have we given you?
Fails.
Right? Exactly.
Pregnant bitches.
Moving a whole fucking card a week from the card from Vegas to California
so he could pass a drug
test. He could pass a drug test, right? Like, they have done so much for him. I agree. He's the wrong guy
he's the wrong guy to ask for more money.
Wrong guy to ask for more money. But just even everybody always says, well, if you get to that certain point, you can make whatever demand you want. But it's clear that there's certain levels where you can't cross and there's certain demands you can't make. Even Connor has overextended. And Connor is so smart about this where he will ask for everything he wants and then he'll realize that, okay, maybe I'm asked it, and then he'll back it off and he'll find that middle ground where if you want to talk about anybody winning concessions.
He'll ask for 5 things, but he only really wants those 3.
Exactly.
So he'll pull back those 2 and the UFC's like, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, and he's a genius about how he goes about it, right? But I feel like the message it sends to these guys is now, what are the odds that I'm ever going to reach those high points where I can make those kinds of demands? The odds aren't in my favor in the first place. Secondly, even if I get there and I ask for those, there's still a chance they're going to say no, right? And I feel like it just creates an environment where things will never change, but just the rate that the change wants. I feel like if you did a poll of every MMA fan in the world on show and win, on whether they think it's good or not, I feel like it'd be overwhelming. Everybody but the actual organizations thinks it's outdated and archaic and would like to see a structured pay incentive.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's a good model for entry level guys, I guess.
Yeah,
but once you crack top 15,
for
you
sure,
should get a flat rate.
For sure,
100%.
for sure.
Like you've proven, no mishaps, no missing weights.
Yeah.
You've proven your worth.
Yeah,
right.
I agree. That's a great way to put it. And I think that's all we're asking. We're not asking for you to change it all, but just to make some sort of, just to admit to us, right? If you did that, right? Because the way I'm looking at it is, if you do it for everybody, that's one thing. But even to do it just for some people and just to show that is something you can achieve to, and that they recognize by them just saying, if you make top 15, it's flat rate.
Yeah, you see a guy who's in the top 10 and he's making like 50 grand a fight. You're like, what the hell?
It's wild,
That's
right?
top 10?
Exactly, right? And the message that it sends. And to me, I think you're hurting your own brand, because I think when you look at these amazing athletes that are kids that are coming out, in high school and all this, and they're trying to decide they're talented at whatever they want to, and they have that mindset. I mean, so much of this also goes to mindset. It doesn't matter how talented you are. You have to be strong mentally for all these sports, but especially MMA, paramount above them all.
Sure.
But if you're seeing, how hard it is to make it to those highs, and unless you do, you're only going to make 50 grand, where you could be a bench warmer in the NFL and make, $1 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very different conversation. And I feel like in all these ways that the UFC and all these organizations do things to hold themselves in power and to keep the structure how they have it and to not build up the fighters, you're also shooting yourself in the foot, because that slows down. And so many kids that would have made that decision, and MMA is their true passion, and they love to fight and that's what they want to do, but they know that I need to support my family, right? I'm sure there's so many 18-year-olds that go different routes away from it because they know they can make more money there, and that's the only reason. Right? It might not be their passion, but that is what they're doing. And I think there's also an argument, sorry, not to cut you off, but I think my counter argument to what I just said is that I think fighting is also unique in that if it is what you want to do, the money won't matter. And it's going to pull those people where even if they never got paid for any of it, they would do that because they want to be the best, and this is what it is. And it's it's so in our culture and in our history to fight. It's evolutionary within us. There's going to be those people in every society that wants to do it, right? So then, and I feel like that's what the UFC thrives on. It doesn't matter what they pay. Those people that want to do this, they're going to find their way there. Where the apex of that mountain is, wherever it was, whether it was in Valley Tudo or wherever it was historically, there's always that pinnacle for people that wanted to test themselves, right? It's almost like the Mortal Kombat or whatever that was. You know, like that is an archetypal story forever. There's always been that where everybody wants to test themselves, mano a mano in your underwear, you know, no weapons, just see who the man is.
Who's more skilled?
That is something. And I feel like that is a huge piece of what makes the sport so special. But I feel like that's also a huge piece of the bargaining chip that stops a lot of these fighter-centered movements from happening, because there's always going to be some guy, oh, you want to sit out and wait? I got 50 more guys that all want to come and test themselves.
Yep.
Fill your boots, right? And that's great and it's shitty at the same time, right? Depending how you look at it. And that, to me, that just makes me so excited about the sport in general, because what other sport can you see that, right? Like it's so unique and so
I get what fighters are doing when they sit out, but again, you know, you're not doing yourself any favors. Like I don't understand that. Like you go and fight, and then you have your moment on the mic after the fight.
Yeah,
like, bitch, I want more money.
Yeah,
or the whole press conference, right? The whole week up to it. All your interviews are like, I just want more money, man.
And if you want to
fight, I'm doing my job. I just need to be paid more.
And if you want to do interviews in MMA, like I said earlier, there are so many journalists that are extremely fighter centric that will have in detail, right? If you want to have that conversation with Ariel Helwani, with Luke Thomas, with Mark Raimondi, all these guys, there's, you know, I could sit here for 10 minutes just listing names of guys that will have you any time of the week where you can bring those things forward, right? I quite agree with you. There's better ways to go about it. But again, I think we're just figuring this stuff out. We're in the leather helmet days of what the sport is, right? We're just figuring all this stuff out. Nobody knows the best ways. And they just see like, oh, sitting out is that thing to do, because I've seen a couple guys do, I'm going to try that too. And they don't even, I feel like at times they don't even realize exactly what they're going for. They're just kind of following the paths that have been put out, what people have tried before them.
Sure. But also I want to know what underpaid, like John Jones, what is underpaid?
Right. Well, he just put out on his Twitter what he was made. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was very upfront, way more than I've ever seen John. Because certain guys will talk about their pay, some guys won't, but I'd never seen John do
usually
it.
Some after some cards, the UFC
puts
releases
out,
all
but that's only a piece of it, right? That is what they've told the state commission, that's what they're paying them. But then the way they structure these contracts, there's a bunch of bonuses and stuff too. So like, you know, the one that everyone points to is pay-per-view points, right? Like when you get to a certain point, but even you see, Masvidal came out this week and was talking about the pay-per-view points, because me as a fan, you always heard that, but I've never seen I've never understood that of, well, how many, like when you look at
$1 for
a pay-per-view, right? Like
pay-per-views.
Yeah, like we have no idea as fans. And what he was talking about is that, oh, everyone talks about you hit this point. Once you start making pay-per-view points, now you can fucking back the Brinks truck up. You're good. Sure. And I've always heard guys like Brendan Schaub talk about that's where I've got this knowledge from. But then he comes out and says, no, I got to that pay-per-view points and it was peanuts. It was nothing. I had to sit there and fight. And I got it to the point, right? Like when the UFC needed him to save that card with Masvidal or with Usman, and he saves the day, but they had to pay for that, right? And he said, like, I feel like this idea, it's so secretive and we all just think that that's what it is, right? You get to this point and you get these pay-per-view points. And I feel like more and more what I'm realizing is how important your manager is, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Like if you have an Ali Abdelaziz that is going to go in there and fight like a pit bull for you, right? Like I have my own issues.
He's your bro. Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
right? You know, like he's got all his shit, right? And all that. But I don't think...
Bro, not just your manager. He's like, I'm here for you.
Yeah. And he is going to go get everything, everything that you want and everything that you could need. And he's going to fight for those versus guys that just have, you know, a Joe Show manager that's been fighting them since they're on the amateur cards and they're not going and fighting for their total worth. That is such a big impact. And what's also cool to me is now, earlier that the conversation we had with women's MMA and what it is just skill wise and the high points it's reached that has kind of almost surprised everybody, right? And just shown these levels of what women can do and the full potential of what we've been missing, I think, in just women's athletics as a whole. But now there's been this huge fight for years and years and years about female versus male pay. It always comes up with WNBA versus the NBA. Sure. What's cool about fighting is now, if you're a female fighter, there's nothing stopping you from getting Ali Abdelaziz to be your manager. That's the only person that is telling you and fighting for your worth. So now I'm not saying that women get paid exactly what men get paid in MMA. I clearly don't know because there's so much, like we talked about, we don't really have much at this point of real concrete what people make and what people don't make. There's so much secretiveness, but I would bet that disparity, because of that fact that, you know, if you're Ioana and Jacek and you have Ali Abdulaziz going, he's going to fight for her just like he's fighting for all these guys, and he knows what they're making. He knows what the UFC can afford to pay.
What she's worth,
right? What she brings, those numbers that she brings and the fan base that she brings. I feel like that disparity has got to be so much closer. And I feel like that is going to, we're not going to see it for many years, but I think that's going to shake up that entire argument of what that is, and showing that, okay, now it's the structures. It's these things that are traditional and put that way that stop you from making that money. And you're so reliant, right? The WNBA, it's not up to the players for the popularity, right? No, that doesn't mean, you know, it's not like people say like, oh, well, the WNBA doesn't get the same viewership that the NBA does, so how would you expect to make more? It doesn't mean that they're not trying. It's not that those athletes aren't trying as hard as they can and putting the best, and they're not skilled. And they're not putting it's that is up to the WNBA to market and get people excited about and do all that stuff. Whereas MMA, they're going to do all that stuff. But as a fighter, it's up to you to not be excited. I mean, you just want to win, but to be a personality. And if you want to, you know, go that Sean O'Malley route where you give up your privacy and you create a brand and you do all these antics to build it up, you are now
posting bikini pics online, whatever
it is, right? Yeah, you want to go the Paige Van Zandt route, you can make, right? Look at how much money she's making. She's in bare knuckle boxing, making millions of dollars a fight, right? Like that is
probably more on her Instagram and
and that's what she was saying before. Like when she was still in the UFC, before her last fight in the UFC, she was saying to Ariel Helwani, I think it was, I make more money on my Instagram than I do fighting. Yeah, right. And wild, right? But I think that is just one of those things where it shows.
I wish it was a sexy blonde.
Yeah, I know. Wouldn't it make all this a lot easier?
Yeah,
eh?
No shit.
Oh, that's funny. You know, but it's just interesting to me to see that the dynamics are changing. It's almost like I feel like I see the shadows of what the internet did for all these all these industries all over. The internet kind of came in and kicked it in the dick and said, whatever you've been doing traditionally, this is how we're doing it now, right? Just like I'm talking about with the judging, that's the next step where the internet can come in and totally change this over. I feel like you see the same things as now these fighters are realizing like, oh, we don't have to be stuck to the tradition. I don't have to stick to the WNBA to tell me how much to gate what we're going to make. I can take this in my own hands, take personal accountability for that. And whatever highs or lows I reach, it's all on me. Which I love. I love that. And I feel like that's what draws me into the sport so much, because it's so unfortunate. Like to say that fighting is a pure meritocracy, like just whoever's better is who goes further, is not totally true, because there's so much politics and there's so much, and getting on the wrong side of Dana White can really impact your career and all these things. But as soon as that door closes, pure meritocracy, right? Other than the judges, which is why people react so violently when they see the judges go the wrong decision, because this is supposed to be pure, right? If you are the better man or woman, it is clear.
And it's clear.
Yeah.
And then these guys
and when it
suits are like, nah, we picked the other guy.
And when it isn't clear and it's the tightest fight, like I just rewatched that You Want to Fight with Zhang Wei Li. Thank you. I'm struggling with that one. The other day, because I was thinking like, I wonder how close it was. Because I remember there being some controversy over that decision. It was just as hard to judge the second time, knowing everything. Like it was just so close. But when that happens, there's no outrage, right? When it's a super duper tight fight and you can go either way, and it's a decision, there's not really that much outrage. It's when it's really clear. So I think that's where people are saying like, oh, how can you be? I feel like there's an argument people can make that would say, well, you're being too hard on the judges because it's just a hard sport. It is. But the fact that all these people, that there can be outrage where such a majority can see it one way, and when it is close and it's hard decision, people don't get that upset.
Yeah, fair. But to bring up a fight, GSP versus Johnny Hendricks.
Right.
I'll take the judge's side here a little bit. How do you judge damage?
Right. That's
you get a guy like Nate Diaz, who you punch him once, he's bleeding.
Yeah.
All the fight. Right. And then you get a guy, George St. Pierre, bruises like a peach.
Yeah.
Right. Some guys don't bruise that well. Some guys have that gift. So I don't know what you classify as damage. Right. And then
it's so subjective, and
it's all subjective. And how do you use that as a main?
Yeah, one of the main categories of judging is damage, right? And that is so tough. I'm very glad you brought that up, because that is one of the most important things. And then now on the ground, There's damage where there can be total domination where there's no damage caused, where you're just flowing submission attempt to submission attempt, just absolutely walking on the sky on the ground, right? Just so many steps ahead of him. Sure. But did you cause any damage, right? You know, like he was almost in an armbar, almost in an omoplata, almost got choked out, but he's damage-wise, he's fine.
Or do you score the guy who's defending the whole time?
Yeah.
Getting out of the submissions.
Exactly, right? And then
so much.
And then or yeah, if they're defending and stuff, but no damage, but then they stand up for the last 30 seconds and the other guy lands a couple punches and that is damage. So now does that win the round, right? Like, but so much of this stuff, and this all comes back to me is the accountability. That all is true, but that would all change in an instant if after every card, the judges had to sit there for an hour of media availability.
They get a camera.
And people to ask them fucking questions. Why did you do this? Now they have to take notes. They have to be accountable to it. And now that changes. Now we can see. And if they said, you know what, I just really judged that ground control and I do judge that defense, right? And there wasn't damage on the ground. And then people can see after of how these guys are judging this fight, and we can educate them on what we'd see better. Like, I value,
I was like half in, half out of this fight. Wasn't really attracting me. So like I saw the guy land one kick, I gave it to him. Whatever.
Exactly, right? Yeah. But at least there would be some sort of accountability structure so that they could get better and they could grow. Whereas how it's structured right now, where as soon as they hand those cards in, they don't have to talk to anybody. They have nothing. How do you expect them to get better? Like, I feel like that is, you know, there's that one definition of insanity, right? Trying the same thing over and over again, expecting the same result. Mm-hmm. We are putting the same judges with the same criteria in the same ring, the same line of sight, and letting them judge, and then being pissed off when they give bad decisions. Yeah. There's nothing within that structure that helps them grow and helps them get better, other than all of us pissed off the week after talking about the bad decisions. But are they listening to that?
They don't give a shit.
They don't give a shit, clearly, right?
Like, we work for the government. We got our paychecks.
It's awful. But that's where I don't know if to put it back on the UFC, I don't know if they can say like, hey, unless you have some sort of judge accountability system put into your state by 2022, we're going to stop holding events there, right? Or, you know, like that again, it's tough. Like that, the UFC doesn't want to do that. They don't want to. You also don't want to piss off the commissions too, because they can cause a lot of havoc for a
lot of problems for the UFC.
Yeah, like they want a good relationship. It's such a tough.
It's a tough spot for Dana.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for Dana in the UFC for sure.
Gets the most outrage.
Yeah,
he's furious.
Yeah, he does
about the judging. So
yeah.
I'm sure he's trying to figure out a way.
Yeah,
he does a lot of work behind the scenes. Like
for sure,
out of nowhere, he just bought an island.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what he was doing constantly, 24/7.
And how can you blame? And how can you blame Dana for not doing more on that when he's trying to run a business in a pandemic? Like that is one of the hardest things to do. You know, like probably 95% of his effort all year has just been problem solving and putting out fires just to keep this shit on the rails and keep people in jobs, right? Mm-hmm. Which I have so much respect for, and I value that very highly, right? Like I said, I'm very fighter focused and I want the best for the fighters, but I also see Dana's sport and I love what the sport has given me as a fan, and I balance those two in my own head. But for the commissions to just, you know, like, I don't know, like with all the, I guess these days it seems like the only way to make changes is to go out and riot and burn shit down. Why don't we go, if we want to riot somewhere, let's go riot outside of the commissions and say, hey, we want judging change, right? Get your picket signs. I don't know. Yeah. You know, I'll be right behind you. I'll be right there because, you know, it's passionate and it's something that I feel like there's so much meat on the bone to make change there if we want to really make a stamp on what it is in the sport. And I don't know, maybe it'll just take one specific fighter that makes this his goal. And this is what he does with his post-fight press conference. He brings us up and says, maybe he brings up a couple ideas, because what I feel like, what frustrates me a little bit is that every week we talk about the judging and that it's an issue and stuff, but nobody ever comes up like I did on this podcast. Here's my ideas of what kicks around in my own head.
Sure, yeah.
They might not be perfect, might not work, but at least I'm bringing ideas for it. I feel like I get so frustrated where there's so many talking heads in MMA that are talking about the issues, but not a lot of guys coming with solutions. And that kind of is one of those things where
kind of bring up the problems.
And just kind of, you know, somebody should fix this. Someone should fix this. It's like, yeah, somebody should. That somebody can be you, right? Luke Thomas is the biggest one talking about, you know, he's on the infrastructure side of the MMA. He's one of the most vocal guys on some of the stuff, but he has a lot of pull in the sport. He's a very big name and people take him very seriously. You could make some difference with this. Same with Ariel Helwani. Same with all these guys. Yep. You could put your hat in the ring and make a difference.
The fighters too. And the toughest thing is, the biggest thing that takes as fighters is unity and them coming together. But fighting is such a
look out for me, everybody else be damned. I got to look out for myself. It's a selfish sport innately. So it's so hard to get people to come together, right? Like they always ask, do you think there'll ever be a fighter union? And it's like, I don't know. You hope, but I just can't see it.
There's been how many attempts?
A bunch.
Yeah.
Right? Ashley Smith tried it. There's that Project Spearhead. Might have been the same one. Like, and actually, there's been some court cases that have gone to battle to really lay out that contractor versus employee fight. And I think the UFC won, and they got to keep them contracted. But then they brought them back to court to try and get more transparency on pay. And I think they won that. So I think there's supposed to be a bunch more transparency coming out about fighter pay and stuff in the next little while from that court. So it's not to say that these battles aren't happening. They are. Sure. I think it's very easy to get frustrated with the pace that they go at because we see the problem so clearly, and
you see Venom. It's like, we're going to pay more.
Yeah.
You look at the pay, it's like $500 more.
Yeah, almost
You're
identical.
Like, oh, I guess you lived up to what you said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you technically did pay more. Like, add a 99 cents on the end of every one.
So
like,
funny. Yeah.
And that's one of those ones where Reebok, when they made that deal, and I promise I'll get you out of here. I'm almost running. I'm running you late. When the Reebok deal came in, the biggest thing, like, and from Reebok's point of view, they have no idea. They're just stepping in with this deal. They're talking to UFC. They don't realize that fighter pay structure that we just saw come out with Venom, that was almost identical. I think actually, no, it was even less than that when Reebok first came in. That was an upped level over the years during that Reebok deal. Yep. But it was a huge backlash on Reebok. Every MMA fan hated Reebok because now you see a guy like Brendan Schaub. He was saying, I was making a couple $100,000 a fight on sponsors on my shorts.
For one sponsor. For one sponsor, it's like 20 grand.
Exactly.
And he had like 5 or 6.
Yeah. So and then this rule change comes in, and the UFC makes a whole bunch of money off this deal, but the fighters don't. And now their pay just got cut in half, right? Like they were making
less than whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. It gets
Stupid. Financially lower. Yeah.
Like substantially lower, right? Like in some circumstances, you could have got your pay cut just by that one rule change by 90%. Right? Yeah. You could have been making 90% of your money on sponsors and 10% on whatever 15 and 15 contract you have, right? Like that's one sponsor, right? You win that fight, 15, 30 grand, and you get a 50 grand fight bonus on it because it's knockout of the night and you make 80 grand.
Yeah.
There's guys that make 80 grand on one sponsor, right? Like it was so crazy in that backlash. But the thing is, Reebok didn't know that. They just made this deal and was like, holy fuck, we were in this for 4 years.
Shit, yeah.
Oh, did they ever? Yeah. So then I was thinking, so in my head, I'm thinking, there's no way Venom, because now you can make that excuse once that you didn't know, right? Reebok, that was the first time they did this. They didn't realize the deal they're getting into. Yeah. Now Venom comes in, I'm thinking either they're going to do it this way where it's Venom, they look nice, and aesthetically, I love the new Venom guy.
Sure, they look pretty cool.
I think it looks pretty slick. I like it. But the fact that I know the consequences of years before of what got us to this point, I can't like it. I don't like Venom. I don't appreciate the brand like I would. And the one small change I could have made, and this is between UFC and Venom, if they left one spot on the shorts for one personal sponsor that had to be vetted by Venom and UFC,
sure,
so that the fighter could have one thing. It still looks like a uniform, which is what their big argument is. We want it to look professional. We want it, not everybody to have random shit. That's what they said when they first did the Reebok deal. That, yeah. But you can still have that. It's just one sponsorship, and it has to be approved by Venom and UFC, so you don't have, some crazy porn sponsorship on their shorts or whatever. That doesn't match up with their brand, Venom's or like a competition to Venom, right? If you put
or ABC or ESPN.
Yeah, any of those. Yeah. But you can, there's still a way to do it. And in the UFC's argument, that's infrastructure you need to put in place to market that costs them money. But I think that would bring it forward. That, or Venom has to pay way more in recognition of that. And the fact that they didn't leave that one spot open, right? And I think that I almost see that more on the UFC than Venom. Mm-hmm. And they also didn't substantially up that fighter pay. And maybe they wouldn't have done this deal. It would have been financially worth it for them. But you'll find somebody. Those two things, it was just like, man, I can't get behind it. I was so excited for this change, and because I was so behind what the fighters got fucked over with that deal, for it to change. And this is the new, okay, we're going to correct the wrongs of our past. That was a mistake. We didn't mean to. And it for it to be the exact same deal. It's, I just feel so bad for these guys.
Yeah, and I just don't know where Venom got the cash from. I know they've been around for a while, and they just got like fight apparel and stuff, but I didn't think they were doing that well. They could sponsor the UFC.
Me neither. And maybe this is their, Hail Mary moment where they want to take their company from here to here.
Like we have just enough.
Yeah, so we're gonna
in the bank.
Yeah, we're gonna throw 50% of our budget for this year at this deal. But that visibility and that name of what MMA is, especially with the trajectory it's on right now and how it's just on its way to the moon right now, they're just trying to bootstrap themselves to that to go, hey, that's a good marketing move that can, but you're relying on people to forget what happened years ago with Reebok for that to really take effect. Because for a guy that's in as deep as me, I have some real feelings about Venom. Venom was completely agnostic to them. Didn't really care. Never bought anything from them. Didn't really care afterwards. Was going into this when I heard that they were the ones taking over this deal. I was like, maybe this would. If they treated the fighters right, like I've never bought a fight kit. Some of the fight kits, and I love supporting fighters.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Like I've never seen anybody buy a fight kit.
Right.
I've never seen anybody post.
Yeah. Never. I've never seen anybody walking around in one.
It's not the sport to sell kits.
Right. Exactly.
It's not a team sport. You need a team sport.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to go wear a Tiger Woods jersey.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But this is the thing. Sugar Sean O'Malley, his own merch. I got a bunch of shit. I got Sugar Sean hoodies. I got his basketball jersey. Bunch of fighters that bought their gear that I know the money is going to them.
Shop t-shirts.
You know? Exactly, right? Like I'm not going to go pay Reebok for their fight gear that is fucking over my favorite fighters. I want to support my fighter. All of this stuff, right? The reason I know how to illegally stream fights, but I purchase them for pay-per-view because I want to support the fighters, right? And that's one of those things that I do, and I do that. That's the same reason I want to buy their stuff. But if you're going to try and convince me that this is support, 20% of the purchase of a fight kit goes towards the fighter, like, fuck you. Yeah. I don't want to do that. But if they're going to put their own stuff out, you are just completely shutting down. And I think that's a fan of my caliber, but I'm sure there's guys that aren't that are more Conor McGregor fans and are MMA fans that have bought a Conor McGregor fight kit just because that's what they do and they don't understand all the history behind it. And maybe they're just depending on those fans to step in and make the money on it.
Or they're Irish and it came in the Irish colors and they're like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, maybe it's one of those. Cool. Yeah. But to get the widespread and make it actually be an effective thing that people want to buy, they just missed the mark so much on that. And I was just really hoping that Venom would realize all that, because it's not like this is rocket science. I'm not in any way an MMA expert, and I can see all these things very clearly. Right? Like,
what the fuck I'm talking about?
Yeah. And me and you can see exactly what's happening and the frustrations behind it. And for them to just completely miss the mark again on it, it's just like, so now we're going to do another 4 year or however long this contract is before we can have another opportunity to right that wrong. Like, I don't know.
But I understand the cleaning up the sport and then wanting to look clean and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying Bellator's on the same level as UFC, but I see no problem watching Bellator and
not at all
get distracted by their sponsors. Or
not at all.
It doesn't look unprofessional, I guess, you know?
I would almost argue that I liked it better, because what did I say is my favorite part of the sport? It's the storylines. It's the personalities. It's the genuineness of who that person is, right? If Sugar Sean O'Malley could come out with, weed shorts, or Bryce Mitchell can come out with his camo shorts, right? Yeah. Or with his sponsors, and you could see who that person is, and those sponsors tell a story of what type of people they are and who they're representing and who they're bringing in the cage with them, who's behind them.
Yeah.
It's so much more unique and so much more fits the image of what makes the sport special, of that individuality. I feel like above anything else, I agree. You can take all the other things. It's the individuality of the people and telling those stories and getting invested with that. And I feel like
who's backing them when they walk.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I would argue that trying to put them into uniforms is a step back from what makes your product special. Right. And I feel like to them, they're up against different things too, because that's not what the goals of the UFC are. So much different from what the goals of the average fan is. And everybody always looks like, the goal of the UFC is to make the most money possible. And it is, but at certain times you have to sacrifice the maximum money you can make now for the way the sport is looked at. Right. And I feel like that's what they were saying with that one, is we know that probably the individuality is probably better in having the shorts this way, but if we can make it look like a team sport where it looks the same every time, it's going to draw in some of these other fans that are right. They just want to make it look like traditional sports. But I feel like what makes them makes them better than traditional sports is the individuality, is all these little things.
Different.
It's different.
You want to see something different.
Exactly.
Another NFL, I don't care.
We've seen that before, right?
Yeah.
We've seen the XFL come up and try to do this, right? And just these little things all over. You have to recognize what got you to the dance and what is making the sport so popular, and index into that, lean into those things, not try and find what everybody else is doing. And I think there was a time for that, and I don't blame him for that, because I think there was a stigma around fighting for so long that they were battling against, that there's reasons to do all this stuff. And they were really trying to do that, because now if you can get that stigma off of you, now the ceiling is so much higher of what you can eventually get to. So they're going to lose money now to get that stigma off them, right? Make certain choices that are better in the long term. And as a business decision, I stand behind that all the time, but you have to balance that out without fucking over the fighters too hard, right? Like, that's what I see that Reebok deal was. They They cashed in all this goodwill with the fighters, all this stuff, all this amazing thing that was really inviting for the sport, because you can make really good money on that and you're not so tied to what the UFC is, right? Like once they made that deal, the only money you make is through the UFC. They have you buy the balls, which is good for them. And as a business decision, that's amazing.
And then you see some fighters like Ala Quinta be like, fuck this, I'll go sell real estate.
Yeah,
and make more money.
Right? Exactly.
Come back 2 years later and fight, you know?
It's wild. And that's the consequences that come of it. And all these business decisions are all trade-offs, and there's always going to be consequences. And for me, watching what the UFC has done, I think they're amazing at it. And I feel like people always don't give them the credit that's due. Dana White and the Fertitta brothers and what they brought the UFC to where it stands today is nothing short of amazing. Mm-hmm. It is incredible. And it's an amazing sport, and I think they benefited from that. But to recognize that nobody else was really jumping on and taking the sport to where it needs to be, huge risk. There was so much in debt,
Yeah,
like it's wild. And now you see Endeavor just bought the rest of the UFC like a couple months, maybe a month ago or whatever. Like that's big money. But UFC was the only thing that made them money throughout this whole pandemic, because all their live events and stuff were all shut down, and the UFC kept trucking and grew. And did numbers that they never thought they'd hit.
Without fans, without a live gate.
Without a live gate.
Interesting, yeah.
So interesting and so amazing that they did that. But it shows just that what you can get when you're willing to risk, and when you're really willing to put it all on the line and bet on yourself, which is, in a microcosm, exactly what each fighter that is chasing that dream is doing. It's just saying, fuck everything else. I'm betting on myself. I know what I'm doing, and that is what I'm going to.
Yeah, it's honorable. I like what he's doing, but for guys like us, the lower level guys who aren't even there yet, promotions that we fight for don't have enough money to do that.
Right. You're right.
They need that live gate.
They need that. And that's what's so sad. And it's funny, I've kept you here for fucking 2.5 hours here, and I haven't even asked you any questions about your own personal stuff. It's just too much fun to bullshit. But we'll have you back on here soon, and we'll get more into yours. But just maybe to ask you one last question here before I get you back out of here and don't keep you here all day. How have you been dealing with that? Because I know that's tough. We talk about the UFC being able to grow, and the sport gets to grow with all the stuff, but the amateur guys and the
future,
the future of the guys that are coming up, all can't get fights, and all are just in kind of a holding pattern, just trying to get better, but they're closing gyms. And how has that process been on for you, and how are you dealing with that?
Just
day by day.
Yeah. Seeing what new restrictions come in, seeing what. I know out in BC they did a couple events, so that's promising.
Yeah.
Even out east, I think Halifax, I think it is, Fight League Atlantic. They put on a couple too.
Yeah. So it's just Alberta. That's kind of just.
I have no idea. I have no idea how they're doing it without a crowd,
and how they're making money. Yeah, that's.
Or if they are just sacrificing money.
Maybe
they're actual purists of the sport, promoters. They're just like, fuck it, let's just make local guys fight. I don't know what the pros got paid,
right?
If they got paid,
yeah,
stuff like that. Like, there's a lot that goes into a promotion.
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot of overhead and a lot that goes into it. And like we said, there's so much extra cost that comes with doing it safely during a pandemic that the UFC can do that just fine. They have the coffers for it, but
and I mean, how much of it is a write-off for them, what they spend and stuff too. So
yeah, you're right.
They might be able to get it back, but yeah, for these lower promotions that are some of the biggest in Canada, can't even put on shows yet. So
that's wild. So pretty much just waiting in a holding pattern, just trying to keep getting better and do what you can, train until you hear.
I put enough of a stamp to when the cards do get drawn, they pick mine.
Yeah.
To be on the card. So
yeah. And that's the other thing. Once things started up, there's such a huge backlog of all these guys that want to fight, because when things are in full swing, there's guys that are on medical suspensions. There's guys that just fought that are recovering, that need, a fight camp, that are rolling in, and it's all spread out, where now when everything shuts down for so long, everybody gets healthy. Everybody gets that itch.
Everybody gets hungry. Yeah.
Everybody gets hungry, and everybody wants to get in all at once. Well, I mean, maybe if you keep doing more podcasts, you'll be such a fan favorite by the time you fight again.
Or a heel, whatever.
Yeah, whatever we need to do to get you in the cage.
Just watch the fight. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, like I said, I definitely want to have you on again and maybe ask. I think I was so desperate to talk MMA with somebody
that's fine, man.
for this podcast, because I'm so passionate about it that I kind of figured this might happen where we just talk about the sport. Like the only other one I've had, I had John Morgan on from MMA Junkie, just online and it was only an hour, and that was just so much fun to talk about. And I just enjoy the sport, and I'm hoping to, I'm very thankful that you'd come on and spend your time with me and have this conversation, because not only was it really enjoyable for myself, but it opens the door for me in the future to have more fighters on, and more, not just fighters, coaches and people around the world. Cause I can talk this stuff with anybody all day. I would, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. And I feel like I'm so desperate for it, because in just my day-to-day life, not very many of my friends are this far into the sport. And a couple of my close friends are now, through me and me being such a savage about it, starting to, get into. And my best friend, he just takes every fighter that I love and hates them. Sure. He just goes on the opposite side of it, right? Like Sean O'Malley despises them just to piss me off, right? Like Israel Adesanya, he knows he's one of my favorites. Watched him since he got in the UFC. Every fight, haven't missed one. Love him. Hates him, right? He just keeps the heel going. But to have somebody that just that's fun. To sit down and shoot the shit, talk about it. Like I said, I had a whole thing of questions that I forgot to write down. I didn't ask you one, right? We can just go and bullshit. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. As soon as you get your next fight on the books, we'll promote it. We'll have you back on, and we'll talk about it, and we'll get everyone fighting. Fighting for you, and as much as they can, get everyone behind you, and hopefully if it's if it's in Alberta, we'll get a lot of Slave Lake crowd and Grand Prairie crowd out to come watch and get behind you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, and just one shout out I got to give a local GP guy. He fights out of Grand Prairie, Alex Martinez, just signed with PFL. He fights next Friday, which is super cool for me to see someone that I was DMing. We're actually lining up to podcast, and then this kind of came up, and he's going off. So good for him. He's fighting next Friday. Check it out. I think it's gonna be online. Yeah, all the best to him. Just love supporting the local guys, so I can't wait to see him fight. This probably won't be out until after that, but just hopefully he fucking beat some ass, and he's in there to $1 million.
Represent that Alberta.
Yeah, exactly. Represent that Alberta. He's quite the fighter. So yeah, other than that, anything we missed? Anything we should chop in here?
Good to go, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. That was lots of fun.
Yeah, appreciate it, dude.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. One of my personal favorite episodes to date, I think, just to be able to have this type of conversation. Can't say thank you enough. Big shout out to Bike for Breakfast. Big shout out to Open Air Collective. Follow those on social media. Same with the VonDubCast. Tell a friend. Always looking for help on the podcast. One of the big things I've been looking to do is, get the YouTube page updated. I know I think I said in the last intro that I was going to take this weekend and attack it. Other things came up. Hasn't happened yet. Working on it. I'm going to get there. Just take some time. Other than that, hope you guys have a great week. Probably have a solo episode that I'm probably going to record right after this. That'll be coming out hopefully Thursday or Friday of this week. And then, off to the races for Lloydminster May. Probably have every Monday of May, hopefully, has an episode from some really interesting guys from the Lloydminster area. And I hope to do this with other areas in the future. So, thanks, guys. Bye.